Hey there, tonight we're diving into the glittering chaos of a Tudor palace at Christmas with Henry Roman VIII. What you're about to discover is a holiday feast where peacock pies share the spotlight with political intrigue and jester antics, all under the watchful eye of a king who's as unpredictable as the winter weather. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1535, and you're standing in the heart of a Tudor palace, where the air is thick with anticipation and perhaps a little bit of roasted arcs. Christmas is upon us, and if you think your holiday prep is stressful, just wait until you see what Henry Roman VIII crew is up to. It's like a medieval supermarket sweep, only with more velvet and fewer shopping carts. In the great kitchens of Hampton Court, the hustle is real. Cooks, scullions, and serving men are scurrying about like ants on a sugar spill, tasked with the monumental feat of preparing a feast fit for a king. And not just any king, Henry Roman VIII, a man whose appetite was as legendary as his marital escapades. We're talking about ordering 240 oxen and 330 sheep. That's right, those numbers aren't typos. They're the reality of dining in Tudor times, where meat was the centerpiece of any respectable celebration, and vegetables were merely the garnish. The logistics of this operation are enough to make a modern event planner's head spin. Picture it. Roads are muddy tracks at best, often more reliable for losing a boot than for delivering goods. Transporting all that meat, not to mention the barrels of ale and wine, requires a small army of carts and horses, each groaning under the weight of the festive load, like an Amazon Prime delivery with a penchant for delays and detours. And the costs, let's say they'd make even the most lavish Instagram influencer blush. We're talking a bill running into thousands of pounds, not small change for the Tudor treasury. To give you some perspective, a skilled craftsman at the time might earn only a few pounds a year. So this isn't just a feast, it's a statement, a declaration of power, wealth, and a touch of indulgence that screams, I'm the king, and I know how to party. But let's not forget the sparkle. The palace itself must glimmer like a jewel in the winter gloom. Servants polish silverware until it shines like the crown jewels, while tapestries are hung to add warmth and color to the stone walls. Candles by the thousand are placed strategically to cast an inviting glow, though they're as likely to set something aflame as they are to illuminate. Safety standards, as you might expect, were more of a suggestion than a rule. Behind this festive facade lies an economic and political tapestry as complex as any of those hanging in the Great Hall. This is a time when showing off your wealth was as much about securing alliances and demonstrating power as it was about personal enjoyment. Henry's Christmas revelry is a diplomatic tool, a way to remind everyone from the nobility to foreign ambassadors of England's might and prosperity. So, as you stand there, taking in the scene, remember that what looks like a joyous celebration is also a carefully orchestrated display of Tudor PR. It's a production where every arx, every goblet, and every flickering candle is part of a grand narrative about a king who knew how to wield excess as effectively as any sword. Welcome to Christmas in the Tudor court, where the party is as rich as the pudding and as complex as the king's marital status. And speaking of narratives, let's peel back the curtain on this Tudor Christmas extravaganza and dive into the political theater unfolding beneath those glittering chandeliers. Picture the Great Hall not just as a dining room, but as a stage where the who's who of the realm strut their stuff under the scrutinizing eye of Henry Roman VIII himself, a king who loved nothing more than to play the puppet master in this grand game of thrones. First, let's talk guest lists. Henry's Christmas banquet wasn't your average RSVP affair. This was the ultimate social event, where the invite alone could make or break a noble's career faster than you can say, off with their head. Securing a seat at the king's table was akin to winning the Tudor lottery. It was a chance to rub shoulders with the power brokers of the day, from the Duke of Norfolk to Cardinal Wolsey's ghost, still lingering in the shadows. But here's the kicker. An omission was just as strategic as an inclusion. If your name didn't make the cut, it was the 16th century equivalent of being ghosted, a a sign that your political stock might be plummeting faster than a lead balloon. Now, why all the fuss over a holiday gathering? Because in the Tudor court, a feast was never just about filling your belly. It was a political chessboard where alliances were forged and rivalries simmered, sometimes literally, over a shared platter of roast boar. Think of it like a medieval networking event, minus the name badges and awkward small talk about the weather. Instead, it was all about strategic marriages, land deals and power plays, all conducted over goblets of mulled wine and the occasional bout of indigestion. And speaking of indigestion, let's not forget the games. These weren't your run-of-the-mill party games. No, they were carefully orchestrated encounters where stakes were high, and reputations could be won or lost with a flick of a card. Games like Primero, a precursor to poker, were the currency of the court, where fortunes could turn with the draw of a hand and a well-placed bet. Forget about counting cards. Here, counting coup was more like it. Even a lowly squire could find himself elevated in status if he played his cards right, literally and figuratively. But wait, there's more to this festive farce. The court's intrigues didn't stop at the card table. Dances, masks, and a variety of entertainments were concocted to dazzle the senses and distract from the ever-present undercurrent of political maneuvering. Imagine the scene. Henry, resplendent in his velvet and ermine, cutting a rug on the dance floor while sizing up his court like a hawk eyeing its prey. His moves might say merry and bright, but his mind was always calculating, measuring loyalties, and plotting his next move on the political chessboard. And let's not overlook the ambassadors, those keen-eyed observers from foreign courts, here not just to enjoy the revelry, but to report back to their monarchs on the state of England's power and prosperity. They were the medieval equivalent of paparazzi, taking mental snapshots to be relayed in dispatches back home. In many ways, these gatherings were like press conferences wrapped in a holiday bow, where Henry could flaunt his wealth and influence to an international audience. All this political theatre, of course, wasn't without its casualties. When the music stopped and the candles burned low, some courtiers would find themselves outmaneuvered, their influence diminished, or worse, their heads on the chopping block. Figuratively speaking, of course, unless you were particularly unlucky. It was a high-stakes game, and the cost of losing could be as steep as the Tower of London was tall. As you stand there in the midst of this grand spectacle, it's clear that Henry's Christmas revels were far more than just a show of opulence. They were a masterclass in political power play, where every toast, every dance, and every morsel consumed was part of a larger strategy. So, while the carols echoed through the halls, and the scent of pine and roasting meat filled the air, the real action was happening in the whispers, glances, and unspoken agreements that would shape the fate of the nation. In this Tudor world, the holidays were a time of both merriment and maneuvering, where the stakes were as high as the crown itself, and the rewards were as rich as the plum pudding. So as the festivities continue, remember that beneath the veneer of celebration lies a complex web of ambition, intrigue, and the ever-present drive for power that defined the reign of Henry Roman VIII. Stay tuned, because the game is far from over, and there's more to uncover in the next chapter of this historic extravaganza. As the merriment echoes through the grand halls of Henry Roman VIII court, it's easy to get swept up in the romantic veneer of Tudor Christmas grandeur. But let's take a moment to peek behind the curtain of this medieval masquerade. While the nobles waltz and the goblets clink, an invisible army of servants ensures that the king's celebration runs smoother than a freshly polished ballroom floor. Picture this. Beneath the resplendent glow of candlelit chandeliers, a battalion of cooks, scullions, and kitchen hands work tirelessly, their faces flushed from the heat of roaring fires and the pressure of feeding a king whose appetite could rival that of a small army. It's no small feat preparing a feast that includes over 1,000 oxen and nearly as many sheep. These underappreciated heroes of the Tudor kitchen are the original unsung workers, their calloused hands crafting dishes that would make a modern chef weep with envy. But don't let the aroma of roasted meats and freshly baked pies distract you from the reality of their toil. In a world where the average workday stretched from sunup to sundown, these kitchen laborers often worked even longer hours during the festive season. Forget about overtime pay or holiday bonuses. Their reward was the satisfaction of surviving another day in the service of the crown. The hierarchy was as rigid as the castle walls, with each servant knowing their place and daring not to step out of line. The Tudor class system was as unyielding as Henry's waistband after a 12-course meal. Meanwhile, above stairs, musicians and jesters performed tirelessly, their task to entertain the king and his guests while ensuring the party's vibe remained Instagram-worthy. If only the Tudors had Wi-Fi and a penchant for selfies. Minstrels plucked their lutes, composing melodies that could charm even the most sullen of courtiers, while jesters capered and juggled, risking life and limb to provoke a royal chuckle. Their antics may have delighted the king, but let's be real. The pressure to entertain someone with a penchant for beheadings could make anyone break out in a sweat. This relentless grind behind the scenes paints quite a different picture from the idyllic scenes often depicted in romanticized accounts of Tudor revelry. Historical records, like those detailed in the accounts of the royal household, provide a sobering glimpse into the less glamorous side of these festivities. They reveal a world where the lavishness was often more a reflection of royal propaganda than genuine prosperity. For Henry, these extravaganzas served as a powerful tool of public relations, a medieval Instagram post designed to broadcast England's might and majesty far and wide. Take, for instance, the cost of such celebrations. Maintaining the elaborate festivities could run into the thousands of pounds, an astronomical sum when you consider that the average annual income for a labourer was barely enough to keep a family fed. This was more than just a Christmas blowout. It was a carefully orchestrated display meant to reinforce the king's image as a ruler of unrivaled wealth and power. In many ways, these feasts were as much about projecting political dominance as they were about celebrating the birth of Christ. And let's not forget the environmental impact, a concept as foreign to the Tudors as a vegan sausage roll. The sheer volume of resources consumed, livestock, grains, spices, was staggering, leaving local communities to grapple with shortages in the aftermath of the royal feasts. This was the ultimate flex, a display of excess that would leave even the most extravagant modern influencers blushing. As we delve into primary sources, such as the inventories and expense accounts meticulously kept by royal clerks, we uncover a narrative that challenges the myth of Tudor opulence. These documents lay bare the stark economic realities faced by those who toiled behind the scenes. They reveal a workforce bound by duty and necessity, whose labor was as essential to the success of the celebration as the king's own presence. So the next time you imagine the lavish Christmases of Henry Roman VIII, remember to spare a thought for the unsung laborers who made it all possible. While the nobles danced and schemed under the glittering chandeliers, it was the tireless efforts of the servants, musicians, and jesters that kept the Tudor court running like clockwork. Their stories, though often overlooked, are as much a part of the tapestry of history as the grand narratives of kings and queens. And just like that, we've taken another step into the heart of Tudor revelry, where the lines between myth and reality blur under the flickering candlelight. Stay tuned for more revelations as we continue to peel back the layers of this historical extravaganza. And speaking of layers, let's peel back the next one on this Tudor Christmas onion. While the kitchen brigade sweated it out below stairs, the court above was consumed with a different kind of frenzy, cultural revelry that would make a Broadway producer drool. We're diving headfirst into the world of music, dance, and oh yes, the theatrical pageantry that was the Tudor masque. Now, if you've ever thought your office Christmas party was a bit of a spectacle, you've clearly never witnessed a Tudor masque. These weren't just plays. They were dazzling productions combining music, dance, and drama, with costumes so elaborate they'd make a peacock blush. Imagine a blend of Cirque du Soleil and political propaganda, all wrapped up in one glittering package. And why all the fuss? Because in Henry Roman VIII court, masks were more than mere entertainment. They were a stage for power dynamics and royal PR. Let's break it down. Masks were the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster movie premiere. They featured noblemen and women dressed to the nines, donning lavish costumes that might include anything from gilded armor to ethereal robes. These outfits weren't just eye candy. They were a display of wealth and status. If you weren't in the know, you'd think the performers had raided a treasure chest. But this was all part and parcel of the spectacle, a visual feast designed to impress and awe. And here's where it gets juicy. These productions weren't simply about entertaining the court. They served as a vehicle for messages both subtle and overt. The themes often flattered the king, portraying him as a heroic figure or wise ruler, a bit like patting him on the back with a velvet glove. The masks were, essentially, a Tudor spin on spin doctoring, art and propaganda rolled into one. Imagine Shakespeare meets Machiavelli. So while everyone was clapping along to the music, there was a deeper narrative at play, one that reinforced Henry's image as a powerful and benevolent leader. Speaking of music, it was the beating heart of any Tudor celebration. The court musicians were the Spotify playlist of the day, churning out tunes that ranged from lively dance numbers to solemn hymns. Instruments like the lute, the virginal, and the sackbut. Yep, that's a real thing, provided the soundtrack to the festivities. And it wasn't just background noise. Music was a language of its own, a way to communicate mood and emotion without uttering a single word. In a world that lacked modern technology, a well-composed melody was as potent as a speech. But let's not forget the dances, which were as choreographed as any political maneuver. Tudors took their dancing seriously, with styles ranging from the stately pavane to the lively galliard. These dances weren't just about having a good time. They were opportunities to showcase grace, poise, and social standing. Each step was a statement, each partner chosen with care, as alliances were forged or flaunted on the dance floor. Think of it as a medieval version of Dancing with the Stars, only with higher stakes and fewer sequins. And now, let's talk about the Lord of Misrule, a figure who would probably give HR nightmares today. During the festive season, this role was usually filled by a commoner or a low-ranking courtier, given temporary license to oversee the merriment, and, more importantly, poke fun at the high and mighty. It was like appointing a court jester with an expanded job description. The Lord of Misrule presided over a topsy-turvy world where social hierarchies were momentarily upended. Nobles played the fool, and jesters ruled the roost. It was a brief, sanctioned rebellion against the rigid class system, a reminder that even kings could be the butt of a joke, at least until the 12th night festivities ended. This annual role reversal was more than just a laugh. It was a safety valve for social tensions, a controlled release of pressure that kept the real-life hierarchies firmly in place once the holiday season wrapped up. In a way, it was a clever strategy to maintain social order by allowing a bit of chaos. The Lord of Misrule served as a reminder that power, while absolute, could also be playful. And then there were the plays, those little slices of drama that captured the audience's imagination. These weren't your average Shakespearean tragedies. Instead, they were often light-hearted affairs, designed to entertain while subtly reinforcing the status quo. Think of them as the sitcoms of the Tudor era, with all the wit and humor you'd expect from a royal court. The actors, usually drawn from the ranks of the court or traveling troops, would perform in spaces transformed into makeshift stages, their words echoing off the stone walls of the great hall. But let's not sugarcoat it. These cultural elements, while glittering and grand, were also tools of control. They reinforced social norms and ensured everyone knew their place, both on and off the dance floor. The king may have donned a costume and danced the night away, but make no mistake, he was always the puppet master pulling the strings. Every note, every step, and every jest was part of a larger narrative, one that kept the wheels of the Tudor court turning smoothly. So as the curtain falls on this chapter of Tudor revelry, remember that beneath the gilded surface lay a complex web of power, politics, and performance. The masks and merriment were more than mere distractions. They were an integral part of the court's culture, a reflection of a society that knew how to wield spectacle as effectively as any sword. And as the festivities continued, with music echoing through the halls and laughter ringing out like bells, the Tudor court danced on, a glittering stage where the lines between art and life were as blurred as the wine-soaked revelers themselves. Stay tuned, because there's more intrigue and spectacle to uncover in the next chapter of this historical pageant. As the laughter and music faded into the stone corridors of Hampton Court, leaving only echoes and a few stubbornly clinking goblets, the aftermath of Henry Roman VIII Christmas revels began to unfold like a hangover with royal proportions. The party might have ended, but the financial headache was only beginning. You see, hosting a bash that rivals a Vegas weekend meant that the Tudor treasury took a hit more substantial than a jousting lance. Imagine this. The cost of a single Christmas season at court could set you back several £1,000s. In today's terms, Think of it as throwing a bash that costs millions, with King Henry's appetite alone garbling up a year's worth of a skilled craftsman's wages in mere days. This extravagant expenditure wasn't just a frivolous splurge, though. Oh no, it was strategic. Each ox roasted, and each goblet of wine poured was an investment in the king's image. A splashy ad campaign shouting, "Look at me, I'm not just any monarch, I'm the monarch." It was a way to flex England's muscles, sending a not-so-subtle message to both domestic courtiers and foreign ambassadors. Henry Roman VIII was a force to be reckoned with. But let's not kid ourselves. The economic hangover wasn't limited to royal coffers. The local economy, too, felt the strain. The demand for such feasts could leave surrounding towns and villages with bare cupboards, their resources drained faster than a courtier's tankard. Now, once the last candle flickered out and the halls echoed with silence, the court had to pick up the pieces, both literally and figuratively. The social dynamics post-feast were as delicate as a juggling act performed on a tightrope above the Tower of London. Those who had secured favour during the festivities found themselves basking in the king's glow, while others nursed bruised egos or worse, plants of revenge simmering like a pot over an open hearth. The court was a place where fortunes could turn quicker than a spit over a fire, and the aftermath of Christmas was a time to either consolidate power or lick one's wounds. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find that the echoes of these Tudor traditions have woven themselves into the fabric of modern Christmas. Sure, we might not roast oxen by the dozen anymore, but the spirit of extravagance lives on. The glitzy lights, the over-the-top decorations, and the pressure to host the perfect holiday gathering all have roots in the grand displays of Tudor revelry. Even the idea of Christmas as a time to showcase wealth and status can be traced back to the days when Henry Roman VIII wielded his holiday excess like a velvet-covered scepter. But here's where it gets interesting. Many of the romanticized notions of a Tudor Christmas are just that, romanticized. The images of merry old England, with its snow-dusted rooftops and warm firesides, are more myth than reality. The reality was often harsher, with drafty castles and the ever-present threat of political intrigue. Yet the myths persist because they offer a comforting narrative, one where the past seems simpler, more magical. It's a bit like viewing history through rose-tinted glasses, where the grit and grime fade away, leaving only the glitter. In contemplating the legacy of these Tudor traditions, left with a tapestry of myth and reality, interwoven like the threads in one of those magnificent tapestries lining the palace walls. On one hand, they reinforced Henry's image as a powerful monarch, a leader whose court was the center of the known universe, or at least the universe that mattered back then. On the other hand, they remind us of the stark contrasts between the opulence of the court and the realities of the everyday people who supported it, much like the layers of a rich, complex fruitcake. So, the next time you deck the halls or ponder the perfect gift, spare a thought for those Tudor revelers, whose celebrations have left a lasting mark on our own holiday traditions, both in the glimmering myths we cherish and the more sobering realities we often overlook. Because, let's face it, behind every glittering holiday facade, there's always a story of ambition, power, and a touch of chaos, just as there was in the grand court of Henry Roman VIII. And with that, our journey through the Tudor Christmas comes to a close, leaving us with a richer understanding of how the past continues to shape the present, one festive echo at a time. In a humble Italian village called Vinci, nestled about 20 miles west of Florence, a boy named Leonardo was born in 1452. And no, Vinci isn't just a clever part of his name. It's where this Renaissance wonder first opened his eyes to the world, as the illegitimate son of a notary, Piero da Vinci, and a peasant girl named Caterina. Now, in the 15th century, being illegitimate was a bit like being the kid who brings off-brand snacks to school. People noticed, but it wasn't the end of the world. It might have even been a blessing in disguise for our young Leonardo, because it meant he wasn't tied down by the rigid expectations of a noble lineage. Instead, he got to roam the Tuscan countryside, indulging his boundless curiosity. You might think that the Renaissance was a time of strict academia and serious learning, but Leonardo had other plans. While other kids were busy with Latin lessons, Leonardo was probably doodling the 15th century equivalent of steampunk contraptions. Latin, schmaltin, He had imaginary war machines to sketch. Picture a boy sitting out on Latin class, dreaming up helicopters centuries before they existed. Leonardo was the kind of kid who'd rather invent a new way to fly than conjugate verbs. Talk about priorities, but don't let his whimsical drawings fool you. Beneath that mop of curly hair was a razor-sharp mind. By 14, Leonardo was sent to Florence to apprentice under Andrea del Verrocchio, a man whose name translates roughly to Andrew the True Eye. Now, Verrocchio wasn't just any painter and sculptor. He was the kind of guy who could turn a block of marble into something that would make you question your place in the universe. Under Verrocchio's tutelage, Leonardo learned more than just how to paint and chisel stone. He learned the art of blending science with art, a skill that would define his entire career. The world of Florence was a vibrant tapestry of art, politics, and commerce. The Medici family, those famous patrons of the arts, held the city in a grip as firm as a banker counting florins. In this environment, Leonardo's talent was like a beacon. He wasn't just a painter. He was a polymath in training, a kid who could mix pigments in the morning and design a flying machine by lunch. As for his quirks, oh, he had them in spades. One of his delightful eccentricities was buying caged birds at the market, not to roast or admire, but to set them free. Leonardo, it seems, had a soft spot for those with wings. Maybe he saw a bit of himself in those birds, creatures not meant to be confined, but destined to explore the skies of possibility. Despite his genius, Leonardo wasn't immune to the everyday challenges of life. The Renaissance wasn't all glamour and frescoes. It was a time of political upheaval and class struggles. Italy was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own ambitions and rivalries. Florence, with its bustling workshops and noisy piazzas, was a hotbed of innovation and intrigue. In this world, Leonardo had to navigate the tricky waters of patronage and politics. As an illegitimate son, he didn't have the automatic respect afforded to those of noble birth. He had to earn his place with nothing but his talent and sheer determination. And let's talk about those inventions. Leonardo's notebooks were filled with drawings of contraptions that seemed ripped from the pages of science fiction. He envisioned tanks, parachutes, and scuba gear, centuries before such things became reality. He was like the cool uncle who claims to have invented everything before it was cool, but these weren't just idle doodles. They were expressions of his relentless curiosity about the world and how it worked. It's like he was asking, why not? Before every invention, why not fly? Why not breathe underwater? Why not dream beyond the limits of the known world? In these early years, Leonardo was already showing the world what it meant to be a true Renaissance man. He was a blend of artist, scientist, and inventor, a man who saw no boundaries between disciplines. And while he might not have been the best Latin student, he was certainly fluent in the language of creativity. His life was a testament to the power of imagination, a reminder that sometimes the greatest geniuses are those who color outside the lines. So, as Leonardo set his sights on the future, Florence became his playground, his laboratory, his canvas. Here, he would begin to leave his indelible mark on the world. One sketch, one invention, one masterpiece at a time. And who knows, maybe those birds he set free found their way to the skies, soaring on the winds of change that Leonardo himself would come to embody. As Leonardo set his sights on the future, Florence became his playground, his laboratory, his canvas. Here, he would begin to leave his indelible mark on the world. One sketch, one invention, one masterpiece at a time. But soon, Florence felt a bit cramped for our budding genius. So, Leonardo packed his brushes and his boundless curiosity and headed to Milan in 1482, under the patronage of Ludovico Sforza, the duke who had a penchant for power, pageantry, and apparently polymaths. Now, when I say Leonardo had commitment issues, I'm not talking about his love life. I'm talking about his projects. Think of him as the original serial starter. The Mona Lisa, for example, is the poster child for work in progress. By the time Leonardo took his first crack at painting this mysterious woman around 1503, he'd already racked up a reputation for leaving works unfinished. To be fair, the Mona Lisa didn't exactly come with a deadline, but when you've been noodling over the same portrait for a decade and still have to cart it around with you like a beloved family pet, you might have a problem. But that's the thing about Leonardo. He was a perfectionist in an age when good enough often had to suffice. His relentless pursuit of ideal form meant that many of his works were never truly finished. He would paint a layer, step back, critique his own genius, and then go back to sketching more inventions, like an artist with a severe case of creative ADHD. Speaking of inventions, let's chat about Leonardo's time under Ludovico Sforza. The Duke of Milan was no stranger to grandeur, and he saw in Leonardo a chance to flex his own muscles of patronage. But while Ludovico might have been expecting a shiny new sculpture or a grand painting, Leonardo's mind was elsewhere, specifically on designs that were as impractical as they were visionary. Take his infamous giant crossbow, for instance. The thing was supposed to be 27 yards long. Yes, that's about the size of a blue whale. And while it looked impressive on paper, it was about as useful as a chocolate teapot in actual warfare. His notebooks were like a Renaissance version of Kickstarter, filled with great ideas that never quite got off the ground. And here's the kicker. While the Duke might have been scratching his head over Leonardo's fantastical blueprints, the artist was busy jotting notes on everything from human anatomy to the flight of birds. He was like the friend who gets distracted by 1,000 Wikipedia tabs, only to forget about the main task at hand. But for Leonardo, these diversions were the main course, not the side salad. Now, amid all this creative chaos, Leonardo embraced a lifestyle that would make any modern-day hipster tip their ethically sourced hat. That's right, folks, Leonardo was a vegetarian. In a time when meat was a symbol of wealth and power, he chose lentils over lamb, not out of economic necessity, but due to his profound love for animals. He wouldn't just write about vegetarianism, he'd live it, much to the bemusement of his meat-loving contemporaries. Picture him at a Renaissance banquet, slipping his veggie stew under the table to buy the freedom of another caged bird. In his view, animals were fellow travelers on this spinning rock, deserving of respect and kindness. Leonardo's vegetarianism wasn't just a personal quirk, it was part of a larger worldview. He saw himself as a citizen of the world, not bound by the narrow confines of nationality or the arbitrary borders of city-states. This perspective may seem avant-garde, but it was precisely this view that kept his mind open to new possibilities and ideas. In Milan, Leonardo's work included everything from painting to engineering, and he even dabbled in architecture and urban planning. He designed everything from waterways and fortifications to the occasional flying machine. But here's the thing about Renaissance Milan. It was a city that thrived on the tangible. While Leonardo was busy dreaming up machines that defied gravity, the city's rulers were more interested in projects that could be seen and touched. Despite the occasional head-scratching from his patrons, Leonardo's time in Milan wasn't wasted. It was here that he created The Last Supper, a masterpiece that, granted, has seen better days, but still showcases the brilliance of his technique. This wasn't just paint on a wall. It was a narrative in color, capturing the drama and emotion of a pivotal moment in Christian history. The problem: he used an experimental technique that didn't quite stand the test of time, much like those New Year's resolutions we all make. Leonardo's Milanese period was also marked by his fascination with the human form. His anatomical studies were groundbreaking, as he sought to understand the mechanics of the human body. He dissected cadavers with a zeal that would make even the most dedicated med student shudder. But it was through this meticulous and sometimes morbid study that Leonardo gained insights that would inform his art and inventions for the rest of his life. So, while Leonardo's commitment issues might have driven his patrons up the frescoed wall, they were also the source of his genius. He was a man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, a visionary unbound by the limitations of his time. And while his dreams didn't always translate into reality, they inspired future generations to explore the boundaries of art and science. As Leonardo continued his journey, he left behind a trail of unfinished projects and sketches that hinted at a future yet to be realized. But perhaps that was the point. Leonardo da Vinci was not a man to be confined by the expectations of others. He was a master of the unfinished, a pioneer of possibility, and a true Renaissance man in every sense of the word. In the end, his life was a testament to the power of imagination, a reminder that the greatest achievements often begin as whispers of what might be. And so, the story of Leonardo da Vinci continues, with more mysteries to unravel and more myths to debunk in the chapters to come. As Leonardo continued his journey, he left behind a trail of unfinished projects and sketches that hinted at a future yet to be realized. And so, the story of Leonardo da Vinci continues, with more mysteries to unravel and more myths to debunk in the chapters to come. Now, let's dive into the tangled web of Leonardo's later years. Picture him, though not too vividly, lest you get lost in that wild beard, working as a military engineer for Caesar Borgia. Yes, the infamous son of Pope Alexander VIII, who had a reputation for being more villain than visionary. In 1502, Leonardo found himself in Caesar's service, a man who was as ruthless as he was charismatic. Caesar's ambitions were as grand as they were brutal, and he needed someone with a mind as sharp as his blade to help him conquer the Italian peninsula. Enter Leonardo, with his sketchbooks full of dreams and designs that promised to change the game of war. But before you imagine Da Vinci leading troops into battle with a paintbrush in one hand and a sketchbook in the other, let's set the record straight. Leonardo was more of a backstage genius than a frontline fighter. His role was to imagine, design, and sometimes construct the instruments of war. Think of him as the Renaissance version of Q from the James Bond series, minus the exploding pens, but definitely with a penchant for the dramatic. He drafted plans for fortifications, devised water barriers, and even conceptualized a bizarre armored vehicle that looked more like a giant turtle than anything you'd want to take into combat. It was a time when the art of war was as much about intimidation as it was about actual fighting, and Leonardo's designs fit the bill. Now, speaking of his infamous procrastination, Leonardo could procrastinate with the best of them. And by them, I mean the guy who invented the snooze button. His notebooks were an eclectic mix of brilliant insights and half-finished doodles. They were like the Renaissance version of a cluttered desktop, full of open tabs and forgotten files. Leonardo's brain was a perpetual motion machine, always onto the next big idea before the ink had dried on the last one. Projects like the gigantic horse statue for Ludovico Sforza remained unfinished, not because he lacked the skill, because he was already dreaming up flying contraptions and studying the anatomy of birds. Ah, flight. Leonardo's obsession with conquering the skies was legendary. He was convinced that humans were meant to soar like the birds he so admired. His designs were inspired by the anatomy of birds, and his notebooks were filled with sketches of wings, gliders, and ornithopters, a fancy word for a machine that flaps its wings like a bird. He even wrote, "Once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward." Romantic, yes, but also a tad impractical when you consider the technology of the time. But that's the thing about Leonardo. He was a dreamer in an era when reality was often more grounded. Leonardo's notebooks are a treasure trove of his genius, but they're also a testament to his chaotic mind. These notebooks, over 7,000 pages of them, are filled with everything from anatomical drawings to musings on the motion of water. They're a jumbled mix of ideas, a peek inside the mind of a man who saw no boundaries between art and science. Scholars today still scratch their heads over his mirrored writing and cryptic notes, as if he was leaving behind a Da Vinci code of his own. If you're wondering how Leonardo managed to juggle all these interests, the answer is simple. He didn't. He was like a juggler with too many balls in the air, dropping a few here and there, but always picking up another. His interests were as varied as they were vast, and his insatiable curiosity meant that he was always learning, always exploring. He studied anatomy with the zeal of a med student, dissecting human bodies to understand how muscles and bones worked. He delved into botany, observing the intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. His mind was a sponge, soaking up knowledge from every corner of the Renaissance world. And here's where the economic context comes crashing in. Being a genius doesn't pay the bills, and Leonardo's life was a constant balancing act between patronage and poverty. He was a man of many talents, but also many expenses. His lavish lifestyle, complete with a growing entourage of students and hangers-on, meant that he was always in need of funds. Patronage was the lifeline for artists and inventors, and Leonardo had to navigate the tricky waters of pleasing his patrons while staying true to his vision. It was a dance as delicate as any courtly minuet, and Leonardo was often stepping on toes. Now, let's bust some myths while we're at it. Leonardo is often portrayed as a solitary genius, a lone wolf howling at the moon of creativity. But the truth is, he was surrounded by a circle of students and collaborators who helped bring his visions to life. His workshop was a bustling hub of activity, with young artists learning from the master and contributing to his work. It was a Renaissance version of a startup incubator, with Leonardo as the eccentric CEO. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Leonardo's life, let's remember that he was more than just a painter of enigmatic smiles. He was a man of contradictions, a visionary who struggled with the mundane realities of his time. He left behind a legacy of unfinished projects and chaotic notebooks, a testament to a mind that refused to be confined by the limitations of its age. Leonardo da Vinci was, and remains, a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, a genius whose life and work continue to inspire and intrigue us centuries later. And as we look to the next part of his story, there's still more to uncover about this extraordinary man who dared to dream beyond the stars. Now, as Leonardo's life took its final act in the land of baguettes and berets, he found himself under the patronage of King Francis I of France, a king who, despite the pomp and circumstance of his royal duties, had a soft spot for the arts and a flair for the dramatic. We're talking about a monarch who could appreciate a good fresco as much as a political alliance. In 1516, Leonardo packed his bags, probably with more sketchbooks than clothes, and made his way to the Château du Clos Lucé, just a stone's throw from the king's residence at the Château d'Amboise. Here, the now 64-year-old Parlemarth would spend the last 3 years of his life. King Francis, I was the kind of patron who didn't just want art for art's sake. He wanted it as a symbol of his own enlightened rule. He was like the Renaissance equivalent of a modern-day tech mogul, collecting geniuses instead of startups, and Leonardo fit the bill perfectly. Under Francis's wing, Leonardo had the creative freedom that artists dream of, and he didn't have to worry about where his next meal was coming from. That's right. Gone were the days of juggling patrons and projects like a circus performer with too many flaming torches. But let's not romanticize this too much. While Francis I may have been a king with a taste for the finer things, life in France wasn't all wine and roses. Leonardo was still plagued by the realities of aging. His right hand, the one that had lovingly crafted masterpieces, was now paralyzed, likely due to a stroke. Yet undeterred, he continued to create, sketching with his left hand, and proving that genius knows no limits, not even those of ambidexterity. Among the many projects Leonardo toyed with during his French sojourn was the design of a robot knight. Yes, you heard that right, a robot knight. This was no Renaissance fair cosplay. This was Leonardo's attempt to combine his love of mechanics with his fascination for the human form. The knight was supposed to be able to sit, wave its arms, and even move its head, a medieval automaton that would have wowed the court. Imagine the court's surprise when, instead of a shiny new painting, Leonardo rolls out a suit of armor that could practically do the cha-cha. While there's no evidence that the knight was ever fully constructed, the concept was yet another testament to Leonardo's forward-thinking mind. And speaking of forward-thinking, let's dive into Leonardo's love affair with water. His notebooks are filled with sketches and observations about water, how it moved, how it flowed, and how it could be harnessed for human benefit. He envisioned canals, water pumps, and even devices to test water quality, centuries before such innovations became commonplace. To Leonardo, water wasn't just a resource. It was a marvel of nature, a puzzle to be solved. He once said, "Water is the driving force of all nature," and he meant it. His fascination with water was an extension of his endless curiosity about the world around him. But here's a curveball for you. Despite being one of history's most renowned painters, Leonardo considered painting to be secondary to science. In his mind, art was a means to an end, a way to explore the world's mysteries. His paintings were not just expressions of beauty, but experiments in light, shadow, and anatomy. The Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile is not just a masterstroke of art. It's a study in human emotion, captured in pigments and oils. For Leonardo, painting was another branch of science, a way to understand the divine mechanics of the universe. Let's talk about those legendary notebooks for a moment. You see, Leonardo's notebooks were like the Swiss Army knife of intellectual pursuits. They contained everything from the mundane, sharping lists anyone, to the profound, like detailed anatomical sketches that would make a modern surgeon weep with envy. But here's the kicker. These notebooks were scattered after his death, as if blown by the winds of history. Some were lost, others sold, and many ended up in obscure collections around the world. Today, they're cherished as glimpses into the mind of a genius, But at the time, they were just pages of scribbles to be shuffled around. In a world where information was as valuable as gold, Leonardo's notebooks were a treasure trove. They contained insights that wouldn't be fully appreciated for centuries. And yet, they were almost lost to the sands of time, like a great novel without a publisher. It's a testament to Leonardo's brilliance, and perhaps his disorganization, that his life's work was nearly forgotten, only to be pieced together later like some grand jigsaw puzzle. So, as we leave Leonardo in his final years, let's remember the man beyond the myth. He wasn't just an artist or an inventor. He was a thinker who dared to ask questions no one else would. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, a place of endless possibilities, waiting to be explored. And while he may have left behind more sketches than finished works, his legacy is one of inspiration and innovation. Leonardo da Vinci was a man who danced on the edge of the possible, a true Renaissance rebel whose life and work continue to captivate us today. As we prepare to close the book on his story, there's still more to uncover in the final chapter of this extraordinary life. Stay tuned for the grand finale, where we'll explore the echoes of Leonardo's genius that still resonate in our modern world. And so, as Leonardo's story draws to a close, we find ourselves in the year 1519, in the comforting embrace of the French countryside. Leonardo da Vinci, the maestro of the Renaissance, breathed his last on May 2nd. Legend has it, he died in the arms of King Francis I, though that's likely more of a romantic flourish than a historical fact. But hey, who are we to deny the French a good story? Leonardo was 67, an impressive age for the time, when life expectancy was often cut short by plagues, wars, or the occasional bout of bad wine. As we bid farewell to Leonardo, let's not forget that his death marked the beginning of a legend. You see, Leonardo's posthumous rise to fame is a tale worthy of its own Da Vinci Code, minus Tom Hanks, but filled with just as many twists. After his death, Leonardo's notebooks, those treasure troves of genius and chaos, were left to his favorite pupil, Francesco Melzi. Melzi, a kind of Renaissance tech support, spent years organizing and preserving Leonardo's scribbles. But as fate would have it, these priceless pages were scattered like confetti at a Medici wedding, ending up in private collections, libraries, and the occasional attic. It took centuries for scholars to piece together the scattered fragments of Leonardo's mind, much like a jigsaw puzzle without a picture on the box. Now, you might wonder, why did it take so long for Leonardo to become the icon he is today? Well, the early 16th century wasn't exactly a time for celebrating unfinished projects and cryptic notes. The world was too busy dealing with the Reformation, the rise of nation-states, and the Ard witch hunt. Leonardo's genius was recognized by some. It wasn't until the 19th century that he was truly celebrated as the patron saint of polymaths. The Victorians, with their penchant for cataloguing everything from Beatles to Beethoven, rediscovered Leonardo's work and elevated him to the status of a universal genius. But here's the kicker. Leonardo's transformation into a pop culture icon is as much about myth as it is about reality. Over the years, his life has been romanticized, mythologized, and, let's be honest, commercialized. He's been portrayed as everything from a sage-like figure with a flowing beard to a brooding genius tormented by his own brilliance. Hollywood loves him, conspiracy theorists adore him, and museums can't get enough of him. The Mona Lisa alone attracts over 10 million visitors a year to the Louvre, each one hoping to decipher her elusive smile. Yet, amid all this adulation, it's worth asking, what would Leonardo himself think of his modern-day celebrity status? Would he be flattered, bemused, or just plain baffled? After all, this was a man who once said, "Painting is a mental thing," suggesting he might have had little patience for celebrity hoopla. Leonardo was a seeker of truth, driven by a curiosity that refused to be satisfied. He wasn't in it for the fame, the fortune, or the Instagram likes. He was in it for the discovery, for the joy of unraveling the mysteries of the universe, one sketch at a time. Now, let's debunk some myths while we're here. The idea of Leonardo as a solitary genius, toiling away in isolation, is about as accurate as a Renaissance map of the New World. In reality, he was surrounded by a network of collaborators, patrons, and students who helped bring his visions to life. He wasn't a lone wolf. He was more like the conductor of an orchestra, guiding his team through the symphony of creativity. And while his notebooks are filled with flights of fancy, they also reveal a man deeply rooted in the practical realities of his time, navigating the complexities of patronage, politics, and economics with a deftness that would make Machiavelli proud. Leonardo's legacy is one of possibility, a reminder that the boundaries between art and science are as porous as a Renaissance sponge. He saw no distinction between painting a masterpiece and dissecting a cadaver. To him, both were ways of understanding the divine mechanics of the universe. In an age when specialization is often prized over generalization, Leonardo's life is a testament to the power of the polymath. He reminds us that curiosity is the engine of innovation, and that the most profound discoveries often come from those who dare to ask, why not? As we wrap up this journey through the life and legacy of Leonardo da Vinci, let's remember the man behind the myth. He was a dreamer, a thinker, and above all, a doer. His life was a tapestry of unfinished projects and unfulfilled ambitions, yet it was precisely this restless pursuit of the unknown that made him a true Renaissance man. Leonardo da Vinci was a luminary who illuminated the path for generations to come, a beacon of creativity in a world all too often content with the status quo. So, next time you find yourself pondering the Mona Lisa's smile, or marveling at the intricate designs of Leonardo's inventions, take a moment to appreciate the mind that dared to dream beyond the confines of its time. Leonardo's story is a reminder that genius is not about perfection, but about the relentless pursuit of possibility. And in a world where the only constant is change, perhaps there's no better legacy than that. In the sun-drenched land where the Nile weaves its way through towering pyramids and ancient whispers, you, dear listener, find yourself as a pharaoh, basking in the glow of divine power and monumental responsibility. Your world is a kaleidoscope of golden sand and the lapis lazuli sky, where your word is law and your every move is watched by hundreds of eyes, both loyal and treacherous. You're not just a ruler, you're a living god, or at least that's what everyone keeps telling you, when they're not plotting to end your reign, that is. Let's talk about this glamorous gig you've got. As a pharaoh, you're the human embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god. Sounds pretty cool, right? But hold your horses, or chariots in this case. The reality of ruling Egypt isn't all incense and adoration. It's a high-stakes game where everyone, including your own family, might be rolling the dice against you. Ancient Egypt was a bit like a soap opera with better costumes and a lot more sand. Take Ramses Roman III, for instance. This guy was the poster child for pharaohs who had to watch their backs. He ruled during the 20th dynasty, around 1186 to 1155 BCE, and faced enough assassination attempts to make a medieval king blush. We know Ramses Roman III is famous for his military prowess. The guy stopped the Sea Peoples, for crying out loud, but his biggest battle was right at home. You see, being a pharaoh wasn't just about leading armies and commissioning temples. It was about surviving long enough to enjoy your own pyramid. Assassination plots were as common as the annual flooding of the Nile, and Ramses Roman III court was no exception. Imagine being surrounded by opulence, gold jewelry, ornate chariots, palatial residences. Now imagine that within those gilded walls, whispers echo through the hallways, whispers of betrayal, treachery, and poison. You might think you're safe in your palace, surrounded by loyal servants and family, but history has a twisted sense of humor. It's like living in a thriller novel where every chapter could be your last. Ramses Roman III knew this world of intrigue all too well. Enter the infamous Harem Conspiracy, a plot that sounds like the latest Netflix drama but was very much real. The plot involved one of Ramses' secondary wives. Yes, even your spouse could be plotting your demise, who wanted her son on the throne instead of the crown prince. It's a classic case of Game of Thrones meets Desperate Housewives, ancient Egyptian edition. But how did Ramses Roman III manage to stay one step ahead of the dagger? Well, to keep his head firmly on his shoulders, Ramses Roman III had to be a master of espionage. Forget your modern-day James Bond. The pharaohs had a network of spies and informants that would make MI6 jealous. You see, Ramses Roman III had a knack for sniffing out betrayal like a desert fox on the prowl. He relied on a web of trusted advisors and secretive operatives who kept their ears to the ground, listening for the slightest hint of rebellion. In a world where trust was as rare as rain, Ramses Roman III's survival depended on his ability to play the long game. His network wasn't just about gathering information. It was a dance of politics and power, where alliances could shift as quickly as the desert winds. This wasn't just about keeping one's throne. It was about maintaining the delicate balance of power that held Egypt together. And it was a job that required constant vigilance. But why was there such a high turnover rate for pharaohs, you ask? Well, the ancient Egyptian throne might have been the most dangerous seat in the house. The stakes were astronomical. Control of one of the world's most powerful empires, immense wealth, and the divine right to rule. It's no wonder everyone wanted a piece of that action. The pharaoh's enemies weren't just foreign invaders. They were right there in the palace, smiling in the banquet hall while sharpening their knives in the shadows. The fascinating thing about these assassination plots is how they reveal the human side of ancient Egypt's rulers. They weren't just stone-faced figures on a sarcophagus. They were humans with fears, ambitions, and vulnerabilities. And that's what makes their stories resonate even today. They remind us that power, no matter how divine, always comes with a price. A price paid in vigilance, strategy, and sometimes blood. So, the next time you marvel at the grandeur of the pyramids or the majesty of a pharaoh's tomb, remember the drama behind those stone walls. The pharaohs were more than just rulers. They were survivors in a world where danger lurked behind every column and curtain. And Ramses Roman III, with his cunning spies and his knack for outsmarting his foes, was one of the greatest players in this ancient game of thrones. But even he couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. After all, history loves a good plot twist. As you drift further into this world of ancient intrigue, keep in mind the precarious balance that pharaohs like Ramses Roman III had to maintain. It wasn't just about wearing the crown. It was about keeping it, against all odds, in a land where the line between friend and foe was often as blurred as the horizon over the desert sands. And yet, despite the danger, the allure of power was irresistible. Because let's face it, who wouldn't want to be a god, even if only for a lifetime? Yet, the appeal of wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt persisted despite the associated risks. Why? Well, let's dive into the economic and political systems that made the pharaohs both powerful and perilously perched on their thrones. Picture this. Egypt wasn't just a land of monumental architecture and sacred rituals. It was a buzzing hub of economic activity. The pharaohs weren't merely figureheads. They were the CEOs of one of the ancient world's richest corporations, with wealth measured not just in coins, but in grain, gold, and everything in between. First off, let's talk about grain, ancient Egypt's version of a Swiss bank account. The Nile, with its predictable flooding, turned the surrounding lands into fertile fields, producing an agricultural bounty that would make any ruler's mouth water. But this wasn't just about feeding the masses or keeping the guards happy with regular offerings. Grain was the backbone of the economy, the currency that kept the empire's wheels greased. It was stored in massive granaries and used to pay workers, trade with foreign lands, and crucially maintain a vast network of allies. Now, if you're a pharaoh, you've got a treasury filled with grain and gold, and that makes you a prime target. Forget dragons hoarding gold. Pharaohs had to worry about ambitious nobles, disgruntled priests, and even their closest kin looking to make a name, and a fortune for themselves. And let's be honest, who could resist the allure of all that wealth, especially when a single grain shipment could sway the balance of power? But wait, there's more. The economic engine of Egypt didn't run on grain alone. Gold, often sourced from the Nubian mines, was another glittering jewel in the pharaoh's crown. It was used to craft stunning jewelry, fund military campaigns, and build temples that boasted of divine favor. If grain was the bread, gold was the butter that made everything a little more sumptuous. However, with great wealth came great responsibility and even greater danger. Conspirators didn't just want to topple the pharaoh. They wanted to control the treasury, the lifeblood of the nation. Let's not forget the importance of trade routes, the veins through which Egypt's economic lifeblood flowed. The pharaohs controlled an extensive network of trade routes that stretched from the Mediterranean to the far reaches of Africa and Asia. These routes brought exotic goods like incense, ivory, and cedarwood into Egypt, ensuring the pharaoh's court was as lavish as it was influential. But this wasn't just about luxury, it was strategic. Control over these routes meant control over commerce, and by extension, power itself. Of course, Managing these trade routes wasn't a walk along the Nile. It required a sophisticated bureaucracy, a well-organized military, and a keen understanding of geopolitics. The logistics of maintaining these connections were staggering. For instance, a trade expedition to Punt, a land rich in myrrh and other treasures, could take months and involve hundreds of personnel. And let's not even talk about the costs, which could rival a Hollywood blockbuster. The Pharaohs' court, the epicenter of all this wealth and power, was a mixed blessing. On one hand, it was a place of opulence, where every meal was a feast and every garment a masterpiece. On the other hand, it was a hotbed of intrigue and ambition. The costs of maintaining such a court were astronomical, with a constant need for funds to pay artisans, soldiers, and scribes. This financial strain added tension to an already volatile environment, where every banquet could mask a conspiracy, and every gift might come with strings attached. Speaking of strings, the pharaohs were often puppets in a larger game played by powerful factions within their realm. The priesthood, with its vast estates and influence over the masses, was a formidable force. They controlled not just spiritual life, but also significant portions of the economy. The military, too, was a double-edged sword. While essential for protecting the nation and expanding its borders, it was also a breeding ground for ambitious generals who might fancy a crown of their own. In this complex web of political and economic power, pharaohs had to be more than just rulers. They had to be master strategists. Navigating these treacherous waters required cunning and foresight. They had to balance the demands of the gods with the needs of the people and the ambitions of their court. It was a precarious dance, one misstep away from disaster. So, what kept these rulers going? Why endure the constant threat of betrayal? Well, dear listener, it was the intoxicating allure of being the ultimate authority in a world where power and divinity intertwined. The pharaohs were not just leaders. They were living embodiments of order and stability, the linchpins holding the cosmos together. And that, for all its dangers, was a prize worth any risk. As we delve deeper into the machinations of ancient Egypt's ruling class, remember that behind every grand monument and every ancient decree lies a story of human ambition, greed, and resilience. The pharaohs were more than just symbols of a bygone era. They were players in one of history's most compelling dramas. Stay tuned, because the plot is just beginning to thicken. You see, as we peel back the layers of ancient Egyptian society, it becomes clear that pharaohs were juggling more than just gold and grain. They were also balancing on the precarious high-wire act of divinity and mortality. On one hand, your status as a living god, Horus in the flesh, was your ultimate trump card. On the other, it painted a big, glowing target on your back for anyone with ambitions beyond their social station. This divine status, my friend, was both a shield and a sword. It legitimized your rule, offering the kind of celestial endorsement that made modern political campaigns look like high school class elections. But divine favor wasn't just a free ride to Powerville. It was an ongoing subscription service that required constant renewal. And how did one renew such a heavenly contract? Through religious rites and grand projects that could rival the most extravagant Kickstarter campaigns, albeit with a bit more sandstone and significantly less crowdfunding. Take the Temple of Karnak, for example. Karnak. Not just any temple, but a sprawling, opulent complex that makes modern skyscrapers look like Lego sets. Building such grand structures wasn't just about architectural vanity. It was about cosmic validation. The bigger and more elaborate the temple, the more it screamed, "I'm chosen by the gods," to everyone from the high priest to the humble farmer. The irony, of course, is that the more you built to prove your divine right, the more you attracted envy from those who saw your celestial heartline as a nuisance rather than a necessity. But let's not forget the economic calculus behind all this stone-laying and statue erecting. Constructing these massive edifices was like ancient Egypt's version of an economic stimulus package. It provided jobs, spurred the production of goods, and kept the wheels of the economy well-oiled. Imagine the workforce required. Thousands of laborers, artisans, and scribes, all chipping away under the relentless Egyptian sun. These were the unsung heroes of the pharaoh's divine PR campaign, effectively turning sweat and stone into spiritual capital. However, the economic benefits didn't just end with employment. These temples were tourist attractions long before the term was coined. Pilgrims and traders flocked to them, bringing with them offerings and commerce. It was like Times Square, but with fewer neon lights and more obelisks. The flow of goods and people meant that these religious centers were also economic hubs, reinforcing the pharaoh's power over both the spiritual and material realms. Now, here's the kicker. While these temples were showcases of divine favor, they were also breeding grounds for jealousy and intrigue. Every priest knew that a temple's fortune could rise or fall with the pharaoh's favor. That's a lot of political capital in the hands of a religious elite, who might just have their own ideas about who should really be sitting on that throne. It's a classic case of trust no one, where even the guys in the fancy robes might be plotting to trade your crown for their own set of keys to the kingdom. Let's take a moment to appreciate the pharaoh's predicament. You've got divine status that's as much a liability as it is an asset, monumental construction, projects that double as economic engines, and a religious elite that's potentially as treacherous as any foreign invader. It's enough to make any ruler's head spin faster than a chariot wheel. But the religious rites themselves were more than just a show of power. They were the glue that held the social fabric together. Each ceremony, every festival, was a reminder to the people that their lives were intertwined with the divine narrative. These events were not just religious obligations. They were social spectacles, drawing thousands to witness the sacred rites that reaffirmed their place in the cosmos. The pharaoh, standing at the head of these rites, was the linchpin in this cosmic order. And here's the thing. No matter how many statues bore your likeness or how many priests chanted your praises, the human element was never far from the surface. Behind the godly facade was always the very real possibility of human error, ambition, and betrayal. The line between divine right and human scheming was as thin as a papyrus scroll. So, as we continue to navigate this labyrinth of ancient Egyptian politics and religion, remember that every grand temple and sacred rite was a double-edged sword. They were both a testament to the pharaoh's divine connection and a reminder of the ever-present danger that came with such power. Stay tuned, because as much as we've unraveled, there's still more beneath the gilded surface of Egypt's ancient rulers. The real stories lie where the divine meets the human, where history's grand narrative is shaped by both the earthly and the eternal. And so, as we stand at the crossroads of divinity and deception, let's dive headfirst into one of the most notorious plots that ever graced the shadowy halls of ancient Egypt, the harem conspiracy against Ramses Roman III. It's a tale that rivals Shakespearean drama, filled with betrayal, ambition, and a cast of characters that could make a Hollywood director swoon. The harem conspiracy wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a full-blown scandal that rocked the 20th dynasty to its core. Our primary source for this cloak and dagger affair is the judicial papyrus of Turin, a document that reads like the minutes of a particularly juicy courtroom drama. Imagine the scene. Ramses Roman III, a pharaoh with a penchant for outliving his enemies, caught in a web of treachery spun within his own household. Talk about keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. At the heart of this conspiracy was one of Ramses' secondary wives, Ti, who was gunning for her son, Pentower, to snatch the throne from the rightful heir. Now, you might be wondering why Ti would risk everything for this power play. The answer is both simple and as old as time: ambition. The allure of placing her son on the throne was too tempting, a chance to elevate her status from a secondary role to the mother of the king. It was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of playing the ultimate game of thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of deadly stakes. So how did Ti and her co-conspirators plan to pull off this palace coup? Well, it wasn't a solo act. The conspiracy involved a motley crew of courtiers, palace officials, and even a few harem guards who were promised wealth and power in exchange for their loyalty. The plan was as intricate as it was audacious: murder the pharaoh and clear the way for Pentower's ascension. It was a risky gamble, but then again, what's a little regicide between friends? Now, let's talk about the price of failure. Spoiler alert. Things didn't exactly go as planned for Ti and her band of plotters. Ramses Roman III, despite the best efforts of his would-be assassins, survived long enough to sniff out the conspiracy. His survival owed much to his robust intelligence network, a network that would make today's top spy agencies look like amateurs. It was this web of informants, always on the lookout for treachery, that tipped off the pharaoh about the plot brewing under his own roof. Once the conspiracy was uncovered, Ramses Roman III did not take the betrayal lying down. The pharaoh's response was swift and brutal, a testament to the iron fist beneath the golden scepter. Public trials were held, and the courtroom was the stage for the kind of drama that would have been must-see TV in any era. The judicial papyrus gives us a glimpse of these proceedings, detailing not just the charges and testimonies, but also the gruesome fates that awaited those found guilty. Speaking of fates, let's not sugarcoat it. The consequences were anything but pleasant. The punishments meted out were as harsh as they were varied. Some conspirators were executed by impalement, a brutal method that sent a clear message to any would-be traitors. Others were forced to take their own lives, including Pentower, who, according to some sources, was given the option of committing suicide, a grim act that spared him the public shame of execution. But the fallout didn't end there. The trials revealed the deep fractures within the royal court, exposing how fragile the pharaoh's power truly was. It was a stark reminder that even a ruler seen as a living god could not escape the all-too-human pitfalls of jealousy and ambition. And in the grand tapestry of history, the harem conspiracy stands as a poignant example of how the lust for power can turn even the most sacred of places into a den of vipers. Yet, in the aftermath of this bloody affair, Ramses Roman III survival strategies evolved. His crackdown on dissent was not just about punishing the guilty, it was about reasserting control. The trials were public spectacles, designed to show the strength of the pharaoh's justice and the futility of opposing him. It was a strategy as old as time itself. Make an example of a few to deter the many. But here's the kicker. Despite Ramses Roman III efforts to maintain control, the seeds of instability had already been sown. His reign, while marked by impressive achievements, was also shadowed by the constant threat of internal strife. The conspiracy had exposed the cracks in the facade of divine rule, and those cracks would only widen in the years to come. As the curtain falls on this chapter of ancient Egyptian history, remember that the story isn't just about the pharaohs and their would-be assassins. It's a tale of human ambition, of the eternal dance between power and betrayal. The harem conspiracy might have been a plot against a single ruler, but its echoes can be felt across the annals of history, reminding us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So, dear listener, as we leave Ramses Roman III and his tumultuous court behind, consider the legacy of these ancient plots. They are more than mere stories. They are windows into the human condition, filled with lessons that resonate even today. And as we move forward, keep an eye on those shadows, because where there's power, there's always a plot. Stay tuned, for the next chapter of Egypt's royal drama is just around the corner. The eternal dance of power and betrayal, a tune as old as time, and one that never seems to go out of style. Now, as we wrap up this saga of pharaohs and plots, let's talk legacy. Because, like it or not, the deeds or misdeeds of these ancient rulers have a way of echoing down the corridors of history, leaving behind stories that are as much myth as they are reality. First, let's address the elephant in the pyramid, the mythology of the pharaohs. These rulers have been cast as gods walking among mortals, their lives enshrined in stone and story alike. But strip away the gold leaf, and what do you find? A tapestry of human ambition, paranoia, and at times, sheer survival instinct. Ramses Roman III and his ilk were not just divine beings. They were skilled politicians and shrewd tacticians who understood that a pharaoh's greatest weapon wasn't just his armies, but his ability to outmaneuver those who plodded in the shadows. The mythology paints them as untouchable, but in reality they were anything but. They were more like ancient CEOs, juggling divine PR campaigns and internal audits with equal fervor. Their survival tactics, spies, public trials, and a dash of divine right weren't just for show. These were the tools of the trade for any pharaoh worth their weight in hieroglyphs. And while we might romanticize the grandeur of their reigns, the truth is that the throne was a perilous perch. Every decision was a gamble, every ally a potential Judas. It's a testament to their cunning that they managed to keep the crown on their heads as long as they did. And what about the successors who followed in their sandaled footsteps? The legacy they inherited was one of vigilance and strategy. Future pharaohs learned from the successes and failures of their predecessors, adopting and adapting the tactics that kept their heads attached to their bodies. The myth of the unassailable pharaoh persisted, But it was always underpinned by the harsh reality that power is as fragile as the papyrus it's written on. Each ruler had to navigate the treacherous waters of court intrigue, balancing the divine narrative with the very human need for security and control. But let's not sugarcoat it. The appeal of the Pharaoh's life had its dark side. The allure of godhood came with a hefty price tag: paranoia. Living in constant fear of betrayal could turn even the most magnanimous ruler into a ruthless autocrat. The romantic image of the benevolent pharaoh guiding his people through prosperity is often just that, an image. The truth was often grimmer. The harsh desert sun wasn't the only thing casting shadows in these opulent courts. The spectre of betrayal was ever present, lurking behind every alabaster column. So why does the myth endure? Why do we continue to be captivated by these figures, long after their empires have crumbled into dust? Perhaps it's human nature to romanticize the past, to see what we want to see, a time when gods walked among men, when power was absolute and divine. But the reality, as always, is more complex. The pharaohs were not just rulers, they were survivors, playing a game with stakes as high as the pyramids they built. Their stories remind us that power is never just handed to you on a golden platter. It's something you seize, fight for, and defend with every fiber of your being. The legends are alluring, yes, but they are grounded in the gritty reality that behind every great monument is a tale of human endeavor, sacrifice, and often a fair bit of bloodshed. As we close the scroll on this chapter of ancient history, take a moment to appreciate the duality of the pharaohs' legacy. They were both the gods of their own making and the prisoners of their ambitions. Their reigns were a testament to the timeless dance between power and peril, a reminder that while the names and faces may change, the game remains the same. And isn't that the ultimate lesson from history? That no matter how much civilization advances, some things, like the allure of power and the shadows it casts, never really change. So, dear listener, as you drift off into the land of dreams, let the echoes of ancient Egypt's royal drama accompany you. Imagine the flicker of torchlight in a grand hall, the whispered conspiracies carried on the desert breeze. And remember, in the grand chessboard of history, even the mightiest pharaoh was just another player, navigating the Game of Thrones with all the skill and paranoia they could muster. Sweet dreams, and may your dreams be free of treacherous plots and palace intrigue. The sun sneaks through the gaps in your shuttered windows, casting strips of light across your lavish bedchamber. Welcome to another day in the life of a Roman senator. It's the year 50 BCE, and you're waking up in your luxurious domus, a testament to your wealth and status. All right, let's get the day rolling. No time to bask in the morning glow when the business of the Republic awaits. Your first order of the day, the morning ritual, a well-oiled machine powered by an army of slaves. Yes, while the concept of slavery is rightfully abhorrent to modern sensibilities, back in the day, it was as ubiquitous as the Wi-Fi routers of today. Everyone had one, or 20. A typical Roman household could boast anywhere from a handful to 100 slaves, depending on wealth and ambition. At a time when a slave might cost you around 500 denarii, think of it as a hefty down payment on a used car. Maintaining this workforce was no small economic feat. But hey, what's a Roman senator without a retinue to do his bidding? As you stretch and rise from your bed, a slave named Marcus, because every Roman household seems to have a Marcus, stands ready with a basin of water. Forget the modern-day toothbrush and mouthwash. You're starting your morning with a splash of water and a mouth rinse using a twig and some powdered charcoal. Ah, the taste of ancient hygiene. Next up, attire. Now, this isn't a simple throw-on-whatever's clean situation. You're a senator, and your toga is both your daily uniform and status symbol. Draping it is an art form, an impractical, time-consuming art form that requires a slave's expert hands. The toga's a hefty piece of fabric, around 20 feet long and 12 feet wide, and there's a whole song and dance to wearing it properly. But don't worry, you won't be doing the draping yourself. Your slaves, adept at this sartorial choreography, have got you covered. Pun intended. With your toga perfectly draped, you're ready to face the day, and what a day it promises to be. But first, breakfast. Forget pancakes or a smoothie bowl. You're starting with a frugal Roman breakfast, the intaculum. Bread, olives, cheese, and perhaps a sprinkle of honey if you're feeling fancy. Simple, sure, but it'll keep you going until the main meal later. As you munch on your breakfast, let's talk economics. Running a household like yours isn't just about keeping up appearances. It's a constant financial balancing act. The cost of everything from slaves to food to maintenance can quickly add up. But then, as a senator, your wealth isn't just in coins. It's in land, livestock, and of course, political influence. This is Rome, after all, where the line between politics and personal business is blurrier than a toga in a rainstorm. Your domus is not in the serene countryside, but smack in the bustling heart of Rome. Imagine living in a city where the population is over 1 million, with all the chaos that entails. Noise, crowds, and the ever-present smell of a metropolis that's still figuring out sanitation. But don't let the romanticized visions of Rome fool you. This city is as gritty as it is grand. Living here means navigating the practical realities of urban life, like dodging the infamous Roman traffic jams caused by carts and carriages jostling their way through narrow streets. As you sip your morning pasca, a watered-down wine with a dash of vinegar, the ancient equivalent of coffee in terms of morning pick-me-ups, you mentally prepare for the day ahead. The Forum calls, and with it, the political machinations that make Rome the powerhouse of the ancient world. But remember, while the history books are full of tales of glory and conquest, the daily grind of a senator was as much about negotiation and compromise as it was about grand speeches and sweeping reforms. So, ready to step into the sandals of a Roman senator today, we've got a city to conquer, a republic to run, and a toga to keep spotless. With your toga draped to perfection and pasca in hand, it's time to leave the comforts of home and dive headfirst into the chaotic symphony that is daily life in Rome. The Forum awaits, that grand epicenter of political intrigue where the fate of the Republic is debated, decided, and often just plain delayed. As you step out onto the bustling streets, you're not just a man. You're a cog in the massive, creaking machinery of Roman governance. Let's talk about the Roman Forum, shall we? Imagine the beating heart of an empire, a place where politics, commerce, and culture collide. Today, we might call it buzzing, though boiling part of ambition and egos is probably closer to the mark. The Forum is where senators like you gather to make decisions, or at least appear to. It's a spectacle of marble columns and towering monuments designed to awe and inspire. But don't get too starry-eyed. Beneath the grandeur lies a mess of competing interests and cutthroat negotiations. As a senator, your day is filled with meetings, debates, and occasionally a bit of good old-fashioned shouting. You navigate this world of power and influence armed with your wits, some family connections, and maybe a favor or two owed by lesser mortals. The Roman Senate is no democracy in the modern sense. Forget one person, one vote. Here, power is concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families, with senators wielding influence like a gladiator wields a sword, strategically and with deadly precision. You see, the romantic notion of Roman democracy is just that, a notion. Sure, there are elections, but they are less about the will of the people and more about who has the deepest pockets or the most impressive lineage. The average Roman citizen might have a say in local matters, but the big decisions, those are made by the senatorial elite who treat public office like an exclusive club. And the initiation fee, a well-placed bribe, or a strategically arranged marriage. Speaking of power plays, let's delve into the political maneuvering that defines your existence. As a senator, you're constantly balancing alliances and rivalries. 1 minute, you're shaking hands with a fellow senator, and the next, you're plotting their downfall over a goblet of wine. It's a delicate dance, like playing chess while blindfolded, where each move could either secure your position or send you into political oblivion. And here's the kicker. The Senate itself, that storied institution, is more puppet show than powerhouse. Yes, decisions are made here, but real authority often lies elsewhere. In the hands of military generals, for instance, who command legions, and by extension, the true loyalty of Rome. Julius Caesar, anyone. As for you, your role can feel like that of a glorified advisor, with your influence dependent on your ability to navigate the ever-shifting tides of power. Yet, despite the cynicism, there's a certain allure to this world. The grandeur of the Forum, the eloquence of debate, the sheer scale of decisions that ripple out to the farthest reaches of the empire. It's intoxicating, like standing at the center of history as it unfolds. And while the romanticized tales of noble senators serving the Republic might be more fiction than fact, the reality is no less fascinating. It's gritty, complex, and often downright absurd, but it's real. As you make your way through the forum, exchanging nods and pleasantries with fellow senators, you can't help but feel the weight of history pressing in. This is a place where deals are struck and legacies forged, where the future of Rome is shaped by the whims and ambitions of its leaders. And you, with your toga and your title, are part of it all, even if the reality is messier than the myth. It's not always glorious, but it's never dull, and that's what keeps you coming back for more. So, ready to dive deeper into the machinations of Roman politics? There's a Senate meeting to attend, alliances to forge, and perhaps even a conspiracy or two to unravel. The day is young, and the Republic isn't going to run itself. Keep your toga tidy and your wits about you. You're going to need both. As you navigate the political labyrinth of the Forum, stomach rumbling like the distant rumble of Julius Caesar's ambitions, it's time to trade the marble columns for a more intimate setting. Welcome, dear Senator, to the Prandium, the Roman midday meal, an affair where food meets politics in a culinary coliseum of social maneuvering and strategic alliances. Ah, the Prandium. It's not the grand spectacle of a Roman banquet, but a more subdued, yet crucial, pit stop in the day. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a power lunch, where the menu is as much about who's seated around the table as what's on it. Today's spread: a modest array of bread, fruit, cold meats, and perhaps a dollop of garum, Rome's answer to ketchup, a fermented fish sauce that's as divisive as pineapple on pizza. Now, let's shatter some myths about Roman dining, shall we? Picture those over-the-top Hollywood banquets with senators lounging like languid cats, feasting on peacock tongues and flamingo brains. Entertaining, sure, but about as historically accurate as a toga party in Vegas. In reality, such excesses were rare and reserved for the most extravagant of occasions. For most Romans, including senators, meals were straightforward, dictated more by necessity and availability than opulence. The Prandium, however, was more than just a meal. It was a social stage. Here, you're not just eating, you're networking. Seated beside you might be a fellow senator whose vote you need, a wealthy equestrian with a stake in your latest venture, or perhaps a philosopher who insists on debating stoicism between bites of bread. Each bite, each sip, is a calculated move in the game of social chess, where forging alliances or plotting the next political coup is as vital as the food itself. Let's talk economics, because in Rome, even a meal has a price tag. Hosting a Prandium isn't just about stuffing your guests with food. It's about showcasing your status without draining your coffers. A senator's wealth is often tied up in land rather than liquid assets, so these meals are a balancing act between displaying generosity and avoiding financial ruin. Remember, this is a world where a senator's worth is measured not just in denarii, but in connections, and the Prandium is the perfect venue to bolster both. But why all the fuss over a midday meal? Because in Roman society, dining was an extension of politics. The table was where deals were brokered and allegiances tested, where a well-placed compliment could secure support, or a subtle insult could signal a shift in alliances. It's no wonder that the Prandium was as much about strategy as sustenance, a chance to read the room, so to speak, and adjust your political sails accordingly. And then there's the matter of who gets a seat at the table. Exclusivity is the name of the game, with invitations reflecting not just social standing, but political calculus. Inviting the right mix of guests can elevate your status or solidify a coalition, while a misstep could leave you out in the cold, or worse, the subject of gossip that spreads faster than a Roman chariot on a backstreet. Now, let's pivot to the cultural importance of these meals. In Rome, sharing a meal was akin to sharing a trust. It was a way to build and reinforce social bonds, a ritual that transcended the simple act of eating. Bread might fill the stomach, but company fills the soul, or at least that's the poetic way to put it. In reality, the Prandium was a microcosm of Roman society, encapsulating its complexities, hierarchies, and ambitions. But don't let the charm of this midday ritual fool you into romanticizing the past. Beneath the veneer of camaraderie lies a world of intrigue and competition, where the stakes are as high as the empire is vast. It's a reminder that in Rome, every meal, every conversation, is a chance to advance your agenda or defend your position. As the Prandium winds down and the guests begin to disperse, you're left to ponder the delicate dance of power that plays out over a simple spread of bread and olives. This is Rome, after all, where the line between dining and diplomacy is as thin as the razor-sharp tongue of a seasoned senator. The prandium may be over, but the day is far from done, with the afternoon promising more political machinations and perhaps a surprise or two. So, dear senator, ready to step back into the fray? Keep your wits as sharp as your appetite, because in Rome, the real battles are fought not with swords, but with words and wit. The senator waits, and with it, the ever-spinning wheel of Roman politics. With the midday meal and its attendant diplomacy behind you, the afternoon beckons with the promise of spectacle and social maneuvering on a grander scale. It's time to swap the intimate confines of the prandium for the roaring arena of the public games, where Rome's social fabric is both displayed and disguised under the guise of entertainment. First stop, the Circus Maximus, Rome's answer to the modern sports stadium, but with substantially more horsepower. Imagine a colossal racetrack stretching over 2,000 feet long and 400 feet wide, capable of seating over 150,000 spectators. That's roughly 3 times the capacity of today's largest football stadiums. And what's the main event? Chariot races, of course. It's NASCAR meets ancient Rome, with the added bonus of live action that's as likely to end in a pile-up as it is in a victory lap. Now, let's address the myth of charioteers as glorified jockeys. These guys were rock stars of their day, commanding adoration akin to modern athletes. Take Gaius Apuleius Diocles, a charioteer whose earnings reportedly summed up to 35 million sesterces by the end of his career. That's roughly $15 billion today, outstripping the fortunes of some contemporary sports legends. So much for the idea that ancient Rome was a world apart. In many ways, it's uncomfortably familiar. The Circus Maximus isn't just about the thrill of competition. It's a social equalizer, a place where the rigid Roman social hierarchy melts away, if only temporarily. Here, senators rub shoulders with plebeians, and the only status symbol that matters is your allegiance to the right team. The infamous reds, whites, blues, and greens, Rome's chariot racing factions, are more than just sporting clubs. They're a shorthand for political and social identity. Picking a team is less about cheering for the fastest horse and more about staking your place in the social landscape. But why does the state invest so heavily in these spectacles? Enter our old friends, bread and circuses, a phrase as relevant today as it was in ancient Rome. The idea was simple yet effective. Keep the populace fed and entertained, and they are less likely to revolt. Public events like these serve as a pressure valve, a way to placate the masses while diverting attention from the more unsavory aspects of Roman politics. It's the ancient equivalent of a government-sponsored Netflix marathon, but with a bit more blood and guts. The cost of these games is staggering, often amounting to several million sesterces per event. But to the ruling elite, it's a small price to pay for peace and stability. After all, a contented populace is far less likely to question why their leaders are getting richer while their own lives remain stagnant. And for you, dear Senator, these games are a chance to be seen, to be generous, at least publicly, and to remind the populace of your benevolence, even if you're secretly counting the cost. Now, let's move to the Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater if we're getting all formal. This architectural marvel, completed in 80 AD, holds around 50,000 spectators, and is the stage for the most brutal of entertainments, the gladiatorial games. These spectacles are a grim reminder of Rome's darker side, where life and death are decided with the thrust of a sword and the whims of the crowd. It's a stark contrast to the chariot races, which, while dangerous, don't end with a thumb turned down. Gladiators, contrary to popular belief, aren't all slaves or prisoners. Many are volunteers, drawn by the promise of glory, fame, and possibly freedom. It's a grim career path, but in a world with few options for social mobility, it's a chance for some to change their fortunes. Consider the gladiator Spiculus, who was so favored by Emperor Nero that he received lands and wealth, a testament to the bizarre intersection of violence and opportunity. The Colosseum is not just about the violence, though. It's a venue where the social pecking order is on full display. The seating arrangement is a microcosm of Roman society, the emperor and senators in the best seats, followed by the equestrians, and finally the common citizens. Even here, in the heart of Rome's entertainment, the divide between rich and poor is as clear as the bloodstains on the arena floor. It's a stark reminder that while the games may entertain, they also reinforce the societal structures that keep Rome functioning, or at least from falling apart. And let's not forget the political subtext. The games are a tool for emperors and senators alike to curry favor with the public. Hosting a grand event can boost political fortunes faster than a well-crafted speech in the forum. It's a tactical move, a way to say, look, I care about the people, without actually addressing the issues that keep them up at night. It's a bit like offering band-aids for a broken leg, but with more lions. As you take in the spectacle, from the thunderous cheers to the bone-rattling chariot crashes, remember that this isn't just entertainment. It's a carefully orchestrated dance of power, politics, and social control. The emperor might be the one giving the signal for life or death, but the real power lies in the perception of control, the illusion that the people's voice matters. It's a masterclass in crowd management, one that modern governments would do well to study, minus the actual bloodshed, of course. So, as you leave the arena, the roar of the crowd still echoing in your ears, take a moment to ponder the layers of meaning behind these games. They're a distraction, a spectacle, and a statement all rolled into one. The next time you hear a politician offering bread and circuses, remember Rome, where the more things change, the more they stay the same. With the afternoon sun beginning to dip, casting long shadows on the ancient stones of the Colosseum, your day as a Roman senator is far from over. There are still alliances to nurture, enemies to watch, and perhaps a clandestine meeting or two to attend. As you navigate the labyrinth of Roman society, keep your toga unruffled and your mind sharp. For in this city of marble and ambition, every moment is a chance to reshape your destiny or seal your fate. As the last echoes of the Colosseum's cheers fade into the Roman dusk, a new social arena beckons. The Scena, the evening meal where the true gladiator games of politics and society unfold. This is no simple supper. It's an event where alliances are forged over wine and rivalries simmer beneath the surface like a well-spiced stew. The Scena is your chance to wrap up the day's intrigues with a side of roasted dormice, and maybe, just maybe, plot the next move in your ascent up the political ladder. Picture yourself returning to your domus, the familiar chaos of Rome's streets receding behind you as you prepare to host tonight's gathering. Here's where the economic subtext gets interesting. Throwing a Scena isn't just about impressing your guests with culinary delights. It's a financial chess game where every dish reflects your status. Hosting a Scena can cost you anywhere from a modest 1,000 to a jaw-dropping 10,000 sesterces, depending on how much you want to show off, and how much you can afford to lose in the name of political capital. The menu is a testament to your wealth, or your ability to fake it convincingly. Expect a parade of dishes that would make even the most seasoned gourmand raise an eyebrow. Delicacies like boiled ostrich, salted jellyfish, and the piece de resistance, peacock tongue pie. And let's not forget the wine, flowing as freely as the rumors that will inevitably circulate. In ancient Rome, a good vintage is more than just a drink. It's the social lubricant that greases the wheels of conversation, and with any luck, loosens the lips of your guests. Now, let's debunk the Hollywood myth of Roman feasts as orgies of excess. While the occasional bacchanal might have veered into debauchery, the average Scena was more about strategy than hedonism. This is a stage where every glance, every word carries weight. You're not just eating, you're performing with your guests as both audience and co-conspirators. The seating arrangement alone is a complex social equation, with honorific spots reserved for the most influential guests, while others jockey for position at the table and in your favor. As the evening unfolds, the conversation inevitably turns to the day's events. The games, the Senate meeting, the whispers of discontent among the plebs. It's all fodder for discussion. Here, amidst the aroma of spiced meats and the glow of oil lamps, you can test the political waters, gauging which way the winds of power might blow next. This is where you can probe for weaknesses in your rival's armor or plant the seeds of your next great political maneuver. Reflecting on the economic implications of hosting such gatherings, it's clear that these meals are as much an investment as they are an indulgence. In a society where influence is currency, the Scena is your stock portfolio, with returns measured in alliances strengthened and enemies outmaneuvered. But be cautious, for a poorly executed Scena can have the opposite effect, exposing you to ridicule or, worse, political isolation. And then there's the matter of hierarchy. that ever-present spectre looming over every aspect of Roman life. The Sena is a microcosm of the broader social order, a reminder that while all roads may lead to Rome, not all roads are open to everyone. The senator's role in this intricate tapestry is both privileged and precarious, a balance of power and responsibility that requires as much skill as it does luck. As the evening wears on, and the conversation drifts from politics to philosophy, you can't help but ponder the myths that surround your role in society. The romantic image of the noble senator, tirelessly serving the Republic, is a comforting narrative, but one that's often more myth than reality. Beneath the marble facade lies a world of corruption, backstabbing, and ambition, a reminder that the road to power is rarely paved with virtue. Yet, despite the cynicism, there's a certain allure to this life. The legacy of Roman politics is a testament to the complexity and endurance of human ambition. It's a story of power and poetry, of grandeur and grit, where the line between myth and reality is as fine as the edge of a senator's toga. In the end, your role as a senator is part of a grand historical narrative, one that continues to captivate the modern imagination. As the candles burn low and the guests begin to depart, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and the clinking of goblets, you're left to contemplate the night's events. The Sena may have ended, but the game of politics is far from over. Tomorrow brings new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps another chance to shape the destiny of Rome, or at least your own. In this city of contradictions, where the past and present collide in spectacular fashion, the legacy of Roman politics endures. It's a legacy of a world both distant and familiar, where the more things change, the more they stay the same. As you retire for the night, the stars twinkling above the eternal city, you carry with you the knowledge that in Rome, every day is a battle, every meal a negotiation, and every moment an opportunity to etch your name into the annals of history. Sleep well, dear Senator, for tomorrow Rome awaits. You find yourself in a landscape that's equal parts breathtaking and brutal. The Silk Road is stretching out before you, not as the single, glamorous highway you might have imagined, but as a tangled web of trade routes sprawling over 4,000 miles. It's the 2nd century BCE, and the Han Dynasty has just rolled out the welcome mat for merchants, adventurers, and the occasional bandit. Let's adjust that vision of silk-draped caravans gliding effortlessly over golden sands. In reality, it's more of a grit-in-your-teeth, camel-scented endurance test that connects China to the Mediterranean. Now, the term Silk Road is a bit of a historical bait-and switch. Sure, silk was a hot commodity, but it wasn't the only thing making the journey. Horses, for instance, those majestic beasts that were the sports cars of their day, were just as pivotal. Then there's wool, a more humble material that kept folks warm long before puffy jackets were a thing. Trust me, if you were traversing mountain passes or desert expanses, you'd appreciate wool's warmth over silk's shimmer any day. Picture yourself heading eastward from, say, the bustling hub of Samarkand. This city is like the ancient world's version of a Walmart supercenter, and it's not just a shopping stop. It's a melting pot of cultures, a place where languages blend and trade deals are sealed with a handshake or perhaps a nod from a camel. The goods here are as diverse as the people, spices from the east, glassware from the west, and everything in between. As you continue along the route, you pass through Kashgar, another trade hub that's practically a historical celebrity. Think of it as the crossroads where the east literally meets the west. Traders from different lands, with different tongues and customs, all converging to haggle over the price of a bolt of silk or a sack of black pepper. These trade hubs were the lifeline of the Silk Road, and without them, the road would be less of a cultural superhighway and more of a deserted trail. But let's not romanticize things too much. The Silk Road wasn't exactly a walk in the park. You'd be dodging everything from sandstorms to bandits, and let's not even start on the stomach-churning food options. The journey was long, treacherous, and required a stomach for haggling that matched your appetite for adventure. And the distances, oh, the distances. Imagine trekking thousands of miles with no GPS, just the stars to guide you, and maybe a camel that's having an off day. Economically, this was a game changer. The Silk Road wasn't just about the exchange of goods. It was about the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures. The impact is still echoing today. But don't let the allure of exotic goods fool you into thinking this was a leisurely stroll through history. This was commerce at its rawest, a brutal marketplace where the stakes were as high as the mountains you had to cross. In the grand scheme of things, the Silk Road is a testament to human tenacity and the insatiable appetite for connection and commerce. It's not just about the silk or the spices. It's about the stories, the struggles, and the relentless pursuit of trade. And as you stand on this ancient path, with the wind at your back and the promise of adventure ahead, you're not just a traveler of the Silk Road. You're a part of its enduring legacy. All right, you've taken that first step onto the Silk Road, and it's time to dive into the nitty-gritty of caravan life. Spoiler alert, it's not the romantic adventure Hollywood would have you believe. Think less Lawrence of Arabia and more Survivor, Ancient Edition. With over 4,000 miles of terrain to tackle, you'd better kiss the idea of leisurely camel rides goodbye. Instead, you're looking at a grueling itinerary of 15 to 25 miles a day, on a good day. That's if the weather doesn't decide to throw a tantrum or a sandstorm doesn't turn your vision into a sepia-toned nightmare. Let's talk logistics, because managing a caravan is like running a startup, but with more camels and fewer cappuccinos. A typical caravan could include hundreds of animals and people, each with their own agenda. You've got merchants eager to turn a profit, guides who know the lay of the land like the back of their hand, and guards ready to fend off the occasional bandit. And trust me, bandits weren't just a plot device. They were as real as the blisters on your feet. These folks didn't care whether you were carrying silk or spices. They wanted your goods, and sometimes your life. The crew was a veritable United Nations of the ancient world. You had Persians, Chinese, Turks, and more, all trying to communicate and collaborate. It was a multicultural mosaic, all bound by the mutual understanding that survival meant cooperation. Language barriers, forget it. You'd be surprised how quickly people can learn to barter with a mix of hand signals, raised eyebrows, and the occasional outburst of frustration. But wait, it gets better. As if sandstorms and bandits weren't enough, you also had to contend with Mother Nature's mood swings. From the blazing deserts of Central Asia to the bone-chilling mountain passes, the weather was less climate and more climactic challenge. And just when you think you've made it through another day of heatstroke or frostbite, you get to deal with the tax collectors. Yes, even in the middle of nowhere, the taxman cometh. Various empires and kingdoms along the Silk Road had their hands out, demanding a cut of your hard-earned profits. Imagine the joy of finally reaching a trading post only to be greeted by an official with his palm outstretched. As the saying goes, the only certainties in life are death and taxes. Turns out, that was as true in 200 BCE as it is today. But let's not forget the dull bits, because not every day was a battle with the elements or a run-in with thieves. Sometimes the biggest excitement was the monotonous slog from one oasis to the next. Day after day of trudging through endless stretches of nothingness, with only the occasional mirage to break the visual monotony. The hum of the caravan, the clinking of gear, and the rhythmic plod of camel hooves were the soundtrack to this epic, albeit dusty, journey. Now, why did anyone put themselves through this ordeal? Apart from the obvious thrill of adventure, it was all about the bottom line. Trade wasn't just a way to make money. It was a means to power and prestige. The goods themselves were valuable, but the knowledge exchanged, everything from astronomy to medicine, was the real treasure. And while the promise of wealth was a powerful motivator, it was the stories, the shared experiences, and the connections forged along the way that truly enriched those who dared to take the trip. So, while you might not be reclining on a camel draped in silk, with the wind in your hair and the world at your feet, you are part of something bigger. Every mile you cover is a testament to human tenacity and the relentless pursuit of connection. And who knows, maybe one day, those blisters on your feet will become the stuff of legend, shared over campfires by future travelers who dare to walk the Silk Road. As the dust settles on this epic trek, let's pivot to the gritty economics of the Silk Road. Spoiler alert, it's a far cry from stark trading on Wall Street, but the stakes were just as high. Now, why was silk the superstar of this ancient trading show? Simple. It was the Instagram influencer of its day, rare, luxurious, and in demand. In the Roman Empire, silk was literally worth its weight in gold. Yup, you heard that right. Imagine paying for your new toga in silk threads instead of coins. It's fashion capitalism at its finest, but silk wasn't hogging the spotlight alone. Let's talk spices, those unassuming little packets that could make or break a meal and a fortune. Pepper, for instance, was so coveted it could cost more than gold by weight. Why, you ask? Well, a sprinkle of pepper could transform a bland meal into a culinary masterpiece, which was quite the luxury in a world without refrigerators or convenient takeout options. It was the ancient equivalent of adding truffle oil to your pasta. Fancy, expensive, and a sign you'd made it. Now, before you start imagining merchants rolling in riches, consider the costs. Literally, moving goods across continents wasn't just a logistical nightmare, it was a financial one too. Picture this: a caravan loaded with silk, spices, and other valuables, trudging through the desert. Every step of the journey involved a toll, a tax, or a bribe. And we're not talking pocket change here. Depending on the kingdom or empire you were passing through, tariffs could range from 5% to a whopping 25% of your haul's value. It's like having a toll booth every mile, each with its own surly attendant demanding a cut. But the real financial wizards of the Silk Road were the middlemen. These guys were the original wheeler dealers, operating without the benefits of modern accounting software. They knew how to juggle exchange rates, negotiate tariffs, and sweet-talk their way past bureaucratic hurdles. Their secret weapon, knowledge. They understood the value of goods in different regions and could calculate profits faster than you can say Silk Road. In a world where calculators were as mythical as dragons, this was no small feat. Take, for example, the Sogdian merchants. These folks were the masters of the Silk Road, fluent in the art of the deal long before a certain reality TV host made it a catchphrase. They were cultural chameleons, speaking multiple languages and understanding the customs of every land they traded in. They knew which goods would fetch the highest price in Rome and which spices would sell out faster than pumpkin spice lattes in fall. Their ability to navigate the complexities of international trade was nothing short of legendary. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, or rather, smooth camel riding. Exchange rates fluctuated like a medieval stock market, subject to the whims of regional politics and supply chain disruptions. A war here, a famine there, and suddenly your cargo of silk was worth half as much. This was a high-risk, high-reward game, and only the savviest players survived. It was survival of the fittest, with a hefty dose of luck thrown in for good measure. And let's not forget the unsung heroes of this economic epic, the caravanserai. These were the ancient equivalent of truck stops, offering shelter, supplies, and a place to negotiate deals. Part hotel, part marketplace, they were the lifeblood of the Silk Road economy. Here, merchants could rest their weary bones, swap stories, and more importantly, exchange information. In a world without email or social media, word of mouth was king, and the caravanserai was where the magic happened. So, while the romance of the Silk Road is undeniable, the reality was a complex web of commerce, communication, and occasionally conflict. It's a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring pursuit of profit that these ancient trade routes thrived for centuries. And as you stand on the precipice of history, gazing down the dusty path trodden by countless traders before you, remember that every step they took was a gamble, a calculated risk with everything on the line. The Silk Road wasn't just a highway of goods, it was a crucible of commerce, where fortunes were made and lost with each spin of the caravan wheel. As you stand there envisioning the Silk Road as a bustling conduit of commerce, let's smash a few myths that have rolled along this historic route like tumbleweeds. First up, Marco Polo. If your mental image of the Silk Road includes a brave European blazing a trail across the continent, you might be giving Marco Polo a bit too much credit. Sorry, Marco, but you weren't the first European to traverse these dusty paths. Long before Marco's tell-all travel diary hit the medieval bestseller list, Europeans were already making their way into Asia. In fact, a Greek named Mies Titianus beat him to the punch by a solid millennium. Talk about a spoiler. Now that we've cleared that up, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of cultural exchanges. The Silk Road wasn't just a highway for goods. It was the internet of its day, transmitting ideas, religions, and occasionally diseases faster than you can say cultural diffusion. Take Buddhism, for instance. This philosophy made its way from India to China, hitching a ride on the backs of camels and the tongues of traders. Forget TikTok challenges. This was the original viral sensation. By the time the Tang dynasty rolled around in the 7th century CE, Buddhism was as integral to Chinese culture as tea and Confucian philosophy. It's a vivid reminder that commerce and culture are often two sides of the same coin. And let's not forget the women who made their mark on the Silk Road, even if history has often left them in the shadows. These intrepid ladies weren't just along for the ride. They were essential players. Take the Sogdian merchants' wives, for instance. These women were the original multitaskers, managing businesses and households while their husbands were off brokering deals. Their roles were crucial, yet often overlooked, in the grand tapestry of trade. It's a testament to the old adage that behind every successful man is a woman rolling her eyes in quiet exasperation. But it's not all tales of empowerment and enlightenment. The Silk Road also carried its fair share of scandalous stories, the kind that would have fueled gossip circles for weeks. Imagine the cultural shock when Roman soldiers stationed in the East returned home with tales of exotic lands and even more exotic customs. These stories spread like wildfire, sometimes gaining embellishments along the way that would make a tabloid editor blush. The Silk Road was like the ancient world's version of a soap opera, complete with intrigue, betrayal, and the occasional scandal involving a high-ranking official and a cargo of contraband silk. Speaking of silk, let's talk about the economics behind this luxury fabric that mesmerized the Roman elite. The Chinese kept the secrets of silk production under wraps tighter than a celebrity's skincare routine, and for good reason. The economic boom from silk trade was like a caffeine shot to China's economy, propelling it to global prominence. The Romans, meanwhile, were so obsessed with silk that they spent fortunes importing it, despite attempts by the Senate to curb the extravagance. It's a classic case of do as I say, not as I do, because senators were often spotted flaunting the very silk they condemned. Now, let's pivot from the allure of silk to the everyday grind of Silk Road life. The reality was less glamorous and more gritty. The journey was long, the comforts few, and the dangers ever-present. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. The road was peppered with caravanserais, those bustling hubs where merchants could rest, refuel, and swap stories. These oases of commerce and camaraderie were the social media platforms of the ancient world, where information flowed freely amidst the clatter of trade. And speaking of information, knowledge was one of the most valuable commodities traded along the Silk Road. From astronomy to medicine, the exchange of ideas was a two-way street, enriching every culture it touched. Paper, for instance, made its way from China to the West, revolutionizing communication and record-keeping along the way. It's a reminder that sometimes the most impactful exchanges are intangible, sparking revolutions in thought that ripple through time. As we wrap up this leg of our journey, it's clear that the Silk Road was far more than just a trade route. It was a living, breathing entity that shaped empires and economies, cultures and cuisines. It was a testament to humanity's unquenchable thirst for connection, a bridge between worlds that continues to inspire and intrigue. So next time you marvel at the luxury of a silk scarf or the rich aroma of spices, remember the trials and triumphs of those who walked the Silk Road long before us. They're the real MVPs of history, even if their stories are often lost in the sands of time. Stay tuned, because our journey along the Silk Road is far from over, and there are still plenty of tales waiting to be told. As we turn the final pages on the Silk Road's storied saga, let's take a moment to appreciate how this ancient highway of hustle and bustle has imprinted itself on the modern world. It's no stretch to say that the Silk Road was the prototype for globalization, paving the way for our interconnected existence today. You might blame your smartphone addiction on the Silk Road, because it truly was the OG of global connectivity. Long before Wi-Fi and 5G, traders exchanged not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and cultural practices, creating a vibrant tapestry of human interaction that stretched from China to Europe. Now, let's talk about the not-so-romantic decline of this legendary route. Fast forward to the 15th and 16th centuries, when maritime trade routes began to steal the Silk Road's thunder. Enter the age of exploration, where Europeans like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus found that sailing the high seas was considerably less perilous than trudging through deserts with camels prone to stubbornness. The maritime routes were the Amazon prime of their day, faster, cheaper, and less likely to involve a run-in with desert bandits or a sandstorm facial. By the time the Portuguese, Dutch, and English started dominating the seas, the Silk Road had become a bit of a relic. Why risk life and limb crossing the Caravan Desert when you could sail around the Cape of Good Hope? Shipping routes could move bulk goods like grain and timber, which were too heavy and cumbersome for camels or even the hardiest of traders. The economic scales tipped in favor of the sea, and the Silk Road began its slow fade into the annals of history. But don't let its decline fool you into thinking the Silk Road was a flash in the pan. Its legacy is etched in the cultural and technological advancements it spurred. Remember that silk, that lustrous fabric that made Roman senators swoon and Chinese emperors grin like Cheshire cats. Well, the knowledge of silk production eventually spread westward, leading to the establishment of silk industries in places like Byzantium and Italy. This exchange of know-how was a game changer, much like the introduction of paper from China, which revolutionized communication and record-keeping across continents. Imagine a world without paper. It's a terrifying thought for any bureaucrat or novelist. The Silk Road also facilitated the spread of knowledge, from the mathematical genius of Indian numerals transforming into Arabic numerals, to the transmission of astronomical charts that would eventually guide explorers across oceans. In a sense, these trade routes were the arteries through which the lifeblood of innovation flowed, enriching cultures and economies alike. It's a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. And let's not forget the culinary impact. The Silk Road was responsible for the cross-pollination of flavors that would make any modern-day foodie swoon. Spices like cinnamon and cardamom made their way from east to west, tantalizing taste buds and transforming bland diets into feasts fit for emperors. The very concept of exotic spices became a symbol of wealth and power, fueling further exploration, and let's be honest, a fair amount of imperialist ambition. As the dust settles on this grand narrative, it's worth noting that the allure of the Silk Road hasn't entirely faded. Even today, it captures imaginations, inspiring everything from literature and film to ambitious political projects like China's Belt and Road Initiative. This modern reincarnation of the Silk Road aims to rekindle the spirit of cross-continental trade and cultural exchange, proving that the desire to connect is as timeless as the road itself. So, the next time you scroll through your smartphone, remember that the Silk Road laid the groundwork for this global village we call home. It was a testament to humanity's unyielding drive to connect, to trade, and to share. Its legacy is a reminder that the pursuit of commerce and culture is a powerful force, capable of bridging divides and creating a shared human experience. And there you have it, a journey through the Silk Road in all its gritty glory and romantic allure. As you close this chapter, remember that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's the stories of the people who dared to venture beyond their horizons, driven by a desire for connection, knowledge, and the occasional bolt of silk or sack of spices. So, here's to those intrepid traders, the unsung heroes of globalization, whose footsteps we still follow, albeit with a bit more comfort and a lot less camel dung. Your eyes flutter open to the unmistakable cacophony of Thebes in 1500 BCE, where the dawn chorus involves a lot more than just birds. It's the symphony of everyday life in ancient Egypt, with merchants haggling, donkeys braying, and the distant clatter of wooden wheels on stone. This is your world, and today, as on any other day, you're an essential cog in the well-oiled machine of Egyptian society, a weaver. Before you even roll out of your woven mat, let's talk about why you're kind of a big deal. Linen, your bread and butter, is Egypt's textile superstar. Forget silk or wool. In Egypt, linen is the fabric that clothes the guards, pharaohs, and your next-door neighbor. It's so vital that it's used as currency, pays taxes, and even wraps up mummies for the afterlife. Talk about a versatile fabric. You're not just making cloth. You're producing something that's woven into the fabric of Egyptian society itself. Pun absolutely intended. Now, let's bust a myth. Ancient Egyptian weavers weren't all women. Sure, women did a hefty share of the textile work, but men were in the game too, especially when it came to producing large, state-sponsored pieces or temple commissions. Gender roles, more like a tag team effort. You and your family might be part of a larger workshop, or maybe you run a small operation out of your home. Either way, your work is fundamental to the economy. You drag yourself out of bed, wipe the sleep from your eyes, and prepare to face the day. First stop, breakfast. It's not breakfast as you know it, but a simple meal of bread and beer. Yes, beer for breakfast. Before you judge, know that this isn't the IPA from your local brewery. It's a low-alcohol brew, more like a liquid bread packed with nutrients. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a power smoothie. With your belly full, it's time to gather your tools. The spindle and loom weights are your bread and butter, or more accurately, your bread and beer. You grab your spindle, which looks a bit like a small wooden tarp. It's your constant companion, spinning fibers into thread as you go about your day. Then there are the loom weights, vital for keeping your warp threads taut on your vertical loom. These aren't just any weights. They're typically made of clay or stone, and are as crucial to your weaving as a good Wi-Fi connection is to a modern-day Zoom call. Setting up your loom is no small feat. It's a vertical loom, which means you're working with gravity, not against it. Clever, right? The warp threads hang down, and you weave the weft threads across them. It's a bit like playing a giant, upright harp, but instead of music, you're producing yards of fabric. The loom itself is a simple yet effective contraption, and you can't help but marvel at how this ancient technology has stood the test of time. As you work, you consider the economic landscape of your world. Egypt's wealth is inextricably linked to its textiles. The Nile Delta doesn't just flood to create rich soil for crops. It also provides the perfect conditions for growing flax, the plant from which linen is made. The process of turning flax into fabric is labor-intensive. Harvesting, retting, beading, spinning, and finally weaving. Each stage requires skill and patience, which means your work is valued highly. But let's not romanticize this too much. While linen is Egypt's gift to the world, your life as a weaver isn't all sunshine and pharaohs. The work is physically demanding, and long hours are the norm. There's no clocking out at 5 p.m. here. Instead, it's a race against the sun, trying to make the most of the daylight to produce enough fabric to meet demand. There's always pressure to weave faster, produce more, and keep up with orders. And while woven linen might be the ancient equivalent of rocking the runway at Paris Fashion Week, you're more likely to be found in a simple shenty, a wraparound skirt for men, or a calasiris if you're a woman, which is a straight-fitting dress. Your own clothes are practical, made from coarser linen, while the fine stuff, the see-through, butter-soft fabric, is reserved for those who can afford it. Your work might make others look good, but it doesn't always translate to luxury in your own wardrobe. As the sun climbs higher, you weave on, feeling the rhythm of the shuttle as it passes back and forth. Your hands move automatically, muscle memory, guiding the intricate dance of thread over thread. With each pass, the fabric grows longer, a tangible testament to your skill and labor. The day is young, and there's plenty more weaving to do. As you work, you think about the tapestry of life in Thebes, where each thread of linen you create plays a role in the grand design of society. Today, like every other, you're weaving history, one thread at a time. As the sun ascends higher in the sky, you keep weaving, letting the rhythm of the loom dictate your day. But let's not sugarcoat it. This isn't a leisurely stroll through a field of daisies. Weaving fine linen is no walk in the park, let me tell you. It's more like running a marathon with the finish line always just out of reach. The vertical loom, a marvel of ancient engineering that could make even the most tech-savvy modern gadgeteer nod in approval, is both your friend and your taskmaster. Its ingenious design makes use of gravity, allowing you to weave cloth without constantly fighting against the pull of the earth. But that simple elegance comes with its own set of challenges. You see, the warp threads hanging down like strings on a massive harp need constant attention. They're held taut by loom weights, and these weights are your unsung heroes, balancing the tension with the precision of a tightrope walker. You're not just throwing threads together, you're orchestrating a delicate dance where one misstep could unravel hours of work. Weaving isn't just a skill, it's an art form, and like any artist, you work tirelessly to perfect your craft. Now, about that fine linen you're crafting. It's not just any fabric. It's the Egyptian equivalent of haute couture, reserved for those who stroll through life with a little extra jangle in their coin purses. To create such luxurious material, you need the finest flax, the kind that grows from the rich, alluvial soils of the Nile Delta. But not everyone gets to work with these top-tier fibers. Oh no, That's a privilege reserved for the elite of the weaving world, those whose looms are destined to produce textiles for the temples or the pharaoh himself. And here's where social structures come into play. The higher your status in the weaving community, the better your materials. It's like being a chef with access to the finest ingredients while everyone else is stuck with the leftovers. This hierarchy isn't just about talent. It's about connections, family reputation, and sometimes a little bit of luck. But we can't talk about weaving without addressing the elephant in the room, the myth that this was a quick and easy process. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Crafting those fine linen sheets was a painstaking endeavor, a labor of love and endurance. It's the kind of work that required not just skill, but also a good dose of grit and determination. And let's face it, a little bit of stubbornness never hurt anyone. The myth of effortless textile production might be appealing, but the reality is anything but. And while we're on the topic of myths, let's debunk another one. The idea that ancient trade routes were primitive or insignificant. Quite the opposite, my friend. Egyptian textiles were in high demand, and trade routes crisscrossed the ancient world like a complex web of opportunity. These routes weren't just lines on a map. They were lifelines that brought materials from distant lands, connecting Egyptian weavers to a broader economic network. Imagine the excitement of receiving a shipment of exotic dyes from the land of Punt, or trading your linens for spices from across the Red Sea. In a world without Amazon Prime, these trade routes were the next best thing. But all this trade didn't just bring goods. It brought ideas, innovations, and cultural exchanges that enriched Egyptian society. The weaving techniques you employ might have hints of influence from far-off lands, proof that even in ancient times, globalization was a force to be reckoned with. As you work, you're part of a complex economic system that stretches far beyond the banks of the Nile. Each thread you weave contributes not just to your livelihood, but to the grand tapestry of Egyptian commerce and culture. It's a reminder that history isn't just written in books. It's woven into the very fabric of society, literally. So, as you pass the shuttle back and forth, weaving the warp and weft into intricate patterns, you're not just crafting a piece of cloth. You're creating a story, one that speaks of the skill, the labor, and the sheer determination of the weavers who came before you and those who will follow. And while your back might ache and your fingers might be calloused, you take pride in knowing that your work endures, a testament to the artistry of ancient Egypt. The day rolls on, and the sun casts long shadows across the bustling streets of Thebes. Your hands move with a steady rhythm, each motion a testament to the countless hours spent perfecting your craft. As you weave, you think about the people who will wear the garments made from your linen, the traders who will barter with it, and the priests who will use it in their rituals. It's a humbling thought, knowing that your work touches so many lives. And while the romantic notion of weaving may involve images of serene artisans working in peaceful harmony, the reality is often much more chaotic. The workshop is a hive of activity, with weavers shouting instructions, apprentices scurrying to fetch tools, and the ever-present clatter of looms echoing off the walls. It's a cacophony of sound and motion, a testament to the industrious spirit of the ancient Egyptians. But despite the noise and the chaos, there's a sense of camaraderie among the weavers. You're all in this together, bound by the common goal of producing the finest textiles in the land. There's a shared understanding of what it takes to transform simple flax fibers into something extraordinary, and that bond is unbreakable. As the sun begins its descent, casting a warm glow over the city, you take a moment to pause and admire your work. The fabric you've woven is a thing of beauty, a testament to the skill and dedication that goes into every piece. It's a reminder that even in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, there's a place for artistry and craftsmanship. And so, as the day draws to a close, you gather your tools and prepare to head home. There's still much to be done, but for now, you take pride in knowing that your work has made a mark on the world. You're not just a weaver, you're a creator, a storyteller, and a vital part of the rich tapestry of ancient Egypt. The story continues, and you'll be there to weave it, one thread at a time. As you step away from the comforting hum of the loom, the thought of the bustling marketplace beckons. It's time to delve into the vibrant heart of Thebes, where the air is thick with excitement, anticipation, and just a touch of good-natured chaos. Here, the fruits of your labor transform from mere fabric into a form of currency, a key player in the grand economic drama of ancient Egypt. The marketplace is the ancient world's version of a bustling stock exchange, minus the suits and ties, and with a lot more donkeys. Picture a kaleidoscope of sights and smells, spices from distant lands, baskets brimming with dates, and of course, linen, your pride and joy, fluttering in the afternoon breeze. It's here that the barter system reigns supreme, a delicate dance of negotiation where your skill with numbers might just rival your expertise with the loom. Linen is heart property, and you know your work is in demand. But don't let that get to your head just yet. Negotiating in the marketplace is less about finesse and more about survival. Everyone's got an angle, and the trick is to master the art of give and take without losing your shirt. Literally, you might trade a bolt of linen for a sack of grain or maybe some fresh fish. It's all about meeting needs and making sure everyone leaves with a little extra pep in their step. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty, the raw materials. Flax doesn't exactly grow itself, and before it becomes the fabric of choice for the Egyptian elite, it starts as a humble plant. The costs involved in growing and harvesting flax can vary, but it's generally a labor-intensive process. Factor in the costs of retting, that's soaking the flax to loosen fibers, spinning and weaving, and you're looking at a serious investment of time and effort. The finished linen, therefore, carries with it the weight of all those man-hours, and that's reflected in its value. But hold your horses. Before you start dreaming of rolling in riches, remember that there's a less glamorous side to this story. Taxes. Yes, even in ancient Egypt, death and taxes were the only certainties in life. Pharaohs, with their penchant for grandeur, demanded their share of the profits, sometimes as much as 10% of your product's worth. And if you thought modern tax codes were convoluted, Egyptian ones could give them a run for their money. Weavers were often taxed in kind, meaning that a portion of your hard-earned linen would go straight into royal coffers. Picture the ancient equivalent of a tax audit and shudder. The political landscape of weaving is as complex as the patterns on your finest linen. In a society where textiles are more than just clothing, they're also a symbol of wealth and status. Weaving becomes a political act. The Pharaoh's court had a voracious appetite for fine textiles, and being the one to supply them could elevate your status. Or, if you failed to deliver, it could land you in hot water faster than you can say, crocodile sober. As you navigate the marketplace, you're acutely aware of weaving's contributions to the local economy. It's not just about the cloth. It's about the jobs it creates, the trade it stimulates, and the cultural exchanges it fosters. You're part of a vast network of artisans, traders, and officials, all interconnected by threads of linen. This fabric, simple yet indispensable, is a cornerstone of Egyptian prosperity. So here you are, a weaver among many, a cog in the economic wheel of Thebes. Your work is both your livelihood and your legacy, leaving an indelible mark on the world around you. The marketplace is not just a place of commerce. It's a theater of human endeavor, where the stories of ancient Egypt are woven into the fabric of everyday life. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the bustling stalls, you take a moment to reflect on the grand tapestry of history. It's a reminder that while the allure of linen may be timeless, the realities of trade and politics are as complicated as the finest weave. And just like that, you're back into the fray, ready to haggle, barter, and negotiate your way through the marketplace, one thread at a time. In this ancient marketplace, every transaction carries weight. Every trade is a thread in the larger tapestry of life. You're not just selling linen. You're participating in an economy that fuels a civilization. It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, there's order, a pattern, if you will, to the madness. And as you walk through the stalls, you embrace the hustle and bustle, knowing that you're not just weaving cloth, but also threads of history that continue to shape the world. With each negotiation, you're reminded of the delicate balance between necessity and luxury, of the push and pull between supply and demand. You're part of a story that's as old as time, a narrative that's written in the fabric of society itself. And as you make your way through the marketplace, you take pride in knowing that you're not just a weaver, but a vital part of the economic engine that drives ancient Egypt forward. The marketplace is a microcosm of Egyptian life, a place where social hierarchies are both reinforced and challenged, where the rich tapestry of human experience is as varied as the goods on display. It's a place where you learn that, while linen may be the thread that binds Egyptian society, it's the people, the weavers, the traders, the buyers, who truly bring it to life. And as you leave the market, your mind already buzzing with plans for tomorrow's work, you know that you'll continue to weave not just fabric, but history itself, one thread at a time. As you step away from the clamor of the marketplace, let's take a moment to unravel the tangled threads of myth and reality surrounding the life of an ancient Egyptian weaver. Was it really women's work? Or did the men of the house roll up their sleeves and dive into the loom action too? Let's dig into the historical records, because who doesn't love a good fact-checking session? First up, the myth of weaving as strictly women's domain. Now, it's true that many visual depictions from tomb paintings and artifacts show women in the act of weaving. There's a certain romantic notion to it, ladies in flowing calasiris, deftly working the loom, perhaps humming a tune that would rival a top Spotify hit today. But here's the kicker. The reality was far more egalitarian. Men were involved in weaving, especially when it came to producing large quantities or working on state-sponsored projects. You see, weaving was a family affair, much like those weekend garage cleanups where everyone pitches in, willingly or not. Weaving workshops often saw entire families, the ancient equivalent of a mom-and-pop shop, working together. This wasn't just about gender roles, it was about survival and economic necessity. Inscriptions and papyri suggest that men, women, and even children contributed to the production process. When you're racing against the setting sun and Pharaoh's latest order, everyone's hands are on deck, spinning, dyeing, and weaving like their life depended on it, because often it did. Now, let's talk about those linen garments. Fast forward to the end of the day, and the fruits of your labor hang before you, a bolt of fine linen, crisp and gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. Linen wasn't just fabric, it was a walking status symbol. But wait, before you assume only the elite strutted around in fine linen, let me throw a little historical curveball your way. While it's true that the most luxurious, see-through linens were reserved for the rich, the kind that would make any modern fashionista swoon, decent quality linen was more widely available than you might think. Sure, the Pharaohs sported the top-tier stuff, the equivalent of a bespoke suit from Savile Row, but the everyday folks had access to linen garments too. They might not have been rocking the whisper-thin fabric of the elite, but they certainly weren't clad in burlap sacks either. Linen was practical, breathable, and let's face it, a necessity in the sweltering Egyptian heat. Even those lower on the social ladder could afford a piece or two, albeit of a coarser weave. And speaking of social dynamics, let's not forget the importance of linen as currency. In a world where coins were as common as unicorns, linen was a legitimate form of payment. Taxes, wages, tributes, you name it, linen could cover it. It was both the fabric of daily life and the fabric of the economy, literally woven into every transaction. That's right, your humble hand-spun threads were the ancient equivalent of the almighty dollar. But before you get swept away by the glamour of linen-clad aristocrats, remember that this wasn't a textile utopia. Weaving was hard, grueling work. The hours were long, and the conditions could be punishing. There were no labor unions or weekends off. You worked until the job was done, or the sun dipped below the horizon, whichever came first. This was the daily grind, ancient Egyptian style, where the only thing that kept you going was perhaps the promise of a hearty meal and a cold brew at the end of the day. As you trudge back home, the weight of the day's work clinging to your shoulders like the very warp threads you've been wrestling with. Take a moment to consider the complex social tapestry in which you're entwined. Weaving was more than just a means to an end. It was a vital cog in the machinery of ancient Egyptian society. Each thread you spun was a strand in the narrative of a civilization, connecting the past to the present, the mundane to the magnificent. So, as the shadows stretch long and the air cools, you're left with the realization that the tale of weaving is as intricate as the finest linen. It's a story of shared labor, economic survival, and social mobility, all woven into the grand tapestry of human history. And tomorrow, as the sun rises again over Thebes, you'll take your place once more at the loom, ready to spin new threads in the ongoing saga of life along the Nile. As you prepare to rest your weary hands, let's unravel the threads of weaving's cultural significance in ancient Egypt, where fabric wasn't just about fashion. It was a spiritual passport. Picture this. Textiles in religious and funerary contexts were like the ancient equivalent of a VIP backstage pass to the afterlife. Pharaohs and common folk alike wrapped themselves in linen to ensure a smooth transition to the great beyond. Talk about a divine dress code. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of why linen was so spiritually significant. In the world of Egyptian beliefs, purity was paramount, and linen, with its pristine white hue, was the fabric of choice for rituals. It wasn't just about the aesthetics. Linen's inherent qualities made it the ideal material for sacred ceremonies. Its cool, breathable nature symbolized spiritual purity and clarity, essential for communing with the gods. The priests, those ancient influencers, donned linen garments exclusively, believing that its purity would protect them from the impurities of the earthly realm. When it came to funerary practices, linen took center stage. The mummification process was a meticulous art form, and linen shrouds played a starring role in wrapping up the dearly departed for their journey to the afterlife. But don't be fooled into thinking this was an exclusive perk for the elite. Archaeological finds reveal that even modest burials included linen wraps, though the quality might have varied. The ancient Egyptians believed that linen had protective qualities, acting as a barrier between the fragile human soul and the chaotic forces of the underworld. It's like the ultimate security blanket, woven with the hopes and dreams of a safe passage to eternity. Now, let's bust a myth that's as old as time itself, the idea of timeless fashion. We love to romanticize the ancients as fashion pioneers, sashaying through history in styles that never fade. But here's a reality check. Fashion, even in ancient Egypt, was as fickle as a cat on a hot tin roof. Sure, some styles endured, like the trusty shenty and the elegant calasiris, but trends did evolve. Draped silhouettes, intricate pleats, and even color preferences shifted over centuries. So, next time someone waxes lyrical about the unchanging elegance of ancient fashion, remind them that even the ancients weren't immune to the whims of style. Now, let's talk legacy. Egyptian textiles have left an indelible mark on the world, influencing modern fashion in ways you might not expect. Take sheer fabrics, for example. The Egyptians perfected the art of weaving translucent linen, creating garments that were both alluring and practical in their sweltering climate. Fast forward a few millennia, and you'll see echoes of this in today's fashion, from diaphanous summer dresses to the sheer blouses gracing modern runways. The Egyptians knew that sometimes less is more, and their mastery of fabric continues to inspire designers who seek that perfect balance of elegance and functionality. The economic impact of textiles in ancient Egypt cannot be overstated. Linen wasn't just a fabric. It was a commodity that fueled trade and commerce. It connected Egypt to a network of exchange that stretched far and wide, from the bustling bazaars of Mesopotamia to the sun-drenched ports of the Mediterranean. This material was the oil that kept the economic engine running smoothly, a testament to the industriousness of its weavers. As we wrap up our day in ancient Egypt, let's reflect on how the humble act of weaving contributed to the grandeur of a civilization. Each thread spun and woven was a story in itself, a narrative of human ingenuity and perseverance. Weaving wasn't just a craft, it was a cultural cornerstone, interwoven with the rituals, economy, and very identity of ancient Egypt. So, as you lay your head down to rest, consider the legacy of those ancient artisans. They weren't just makers of cloth, they were creators of culture, threading the past with the present, one weave at a time. And as for the idea of timeless fashion, well, trends may come and go, but the story of weaving endures. It's a tale as old as time, woven into the fabric of history and continuing to inspire the world. So next time you slip into a sheer top or admire the intricate patterns of a hand-woven scarf, remember this. You're not just wearing a piece of clothing. You're wrapped in the legacy of ancient Egypt, where every thread tells a story. In the quaint little town of Trier, Germany, back in 1818, a baby was born who would eventually make landlords everywhere shudder. His name, Karl Marx. Now, Marx wasn't exactly born with a revolutionary manifesto in his hand, but he did have an uncanny ability to get under people's skin, especially those trying to collect rent. You see, Marx had a talent for dreaming up world-changing ideas, but a notorious habit of ignoring his financial obligations. His life was a curious mix of intellectual brilliance and everyday chaos, a cocktail that would eventually fuel theories still debated today. Growing up in Trier, a town more known for its Roman ruins than revolutionary thinkers, young Karl was the third of 9 children. That's right. The man who would eventually critique the family unit as a tool of capitalism grew up in a household bustling with siblings. His father, Heinrich Marx, was a lawyer, which might explain Karl's knack for argumentation. His mother, Henriette, likely had her hands full just keeping track of all those kids. Despite the domestic bustle, Karl found time to develop a keen interest in philosophy and literature, which set the stage for his later works. Fast forward to the 1830 and 1840, a time when Karl's pen was as sharp as his wit. He started writing for radical newspapers, which wasn't exactly a ticket to financial stability. In fact, it landed him in hot water more often than not. He studied law at the University of Bonn, but let's just say he was more interested in the local taverns than torts and contracts. His professors probably didn't appreciate his extracurricular activities, but Karl was already on a path that legal briefs couldn't contain. Moving along, Marx's education took him to the University of Berlin, where he fell under the spell of G.W.F. Hegel's philosophy. Hegel believed in the dialectical process, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, a concept Marx would later adapt to his own theories. It was here that Marx began his metamorphosis into the radical thinker we know today. He got involved with the young Hegelians, a group that took Hegel's ideas and ran with them, usually right into the realm of controversy. By the time Marx was crafting his early writings, he was already elbow-deep in revolutionary ideas. Take his work on the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, a mouthful of a title, but it laid the groundwork for his later critique of capitalism. He argued that the state served the interests of the ruling class, an idea that didn't exactly win him friends in high places. But Marx wasn't writing to win popularity contests. He was writing to shake the foundations of society. Now, let's talk about Marx's legendary stint at the British Museum in London. If frequent flyer miles existed for library visits, Marx would have been a platinum member. He spent so much time there, he's rumored to have had a favorite chair, one that probably had an impression of his backside molded into it. The museum library was where he did much of the research for Das Kapital, his most famous work. Imagine him there, surrounded by stacks of books, scribbling notes by candlelight, or more likely, wrestling with a quill pen while drumming up ideas that would set the world ablaze. But let's not fall into the trap of thinking Marx was a lone genius. Enter Friedrich Engels, Marx's ideological partner in crime. Their collaboration was like Lennon and McCartney, but with fewer guitars and more economic theory. Engels was the son of a wealthy textile manufacturer, which is ironic considering he co-authored the Communist Manifesto. Engels had the practical insight Marx sometimes lacked, and together they formed a formidable intellectual duo. Their partnership was not just a meeting of minds, but also a meeting of wallets, specifically Engels' wallet. Engels supported Marx financially, which was crucial given Marx's less-than-stellar track record of paying his bills. Engels once wrote, "Karl, you are a genius, but you will run my pockets dry." At least, that's how we imagine it went. So, while the romantic image of Marx as a solitary thinker, scribbling revolutionary ideas in a dusty library is appealing, the reality was a bit more complex. Marx's ideas were forged in the fires of collaboration, debate, and yes, a fair amount of financial support from dear old Engels. Together, they challenged the status quo with ideas that were as radical as they were invigorating. In the end, Marx's early life and writings were a whirlwind of intellectual exploration, financial instability, and unyielding determination to understand and change the world. His story is a testament to the power of ideas, and maybe a gentle reminder to pay your rent on time. Now, fast forward to 1848, a year that makes historians salivate. Europe was a powder keg of revolutions, a continent-wide game of musical chairs where the chairs were thrones and the music was the clamor of discontent. In this whirlwind, Marx and Engels unleashed the Communist Manifesto, a document that was as brief as it was incendiary, a mere 23 pages that threatened to turn the world upside down. Talk about a pocket-sized revolution. But before we dive into what the manifesto said, let's ponder how these two managed to pen such a concise yet explosive work amidst the chaos. Imagine Marx and Engels, huddled over their drafts, each crammed with big ideas that needed to fit into small word counts. It's like trying to stuff a sumo wrestler into a phone booth. Their collaboration was a blend of Marx's fiery rhetoric and Engel's sharp prose, a literary tag team that could take down the intellectual heavyweights of their day. Now, don't get me wrong, the Communist Manifesto wasn't exactly hot off the press. In fact, it was more of a slow burn. Initially, the reception was lukewarm at best. Picture a few dusty copies languishing on a shelf, waiting for their time to shine. At first, only a handful of European radicals bothered to give it a read. It was like a band's debut album that only went platinum after the lead singer got arrested. Its fame grew as the world got more tumultuous. So why did this little pamphlet eventually resonate so deeply? Well, let's talk socio-economic conditions. We're in a time when Europe was practically allergic to stability. Industrialization was reshaping societies faster than you could say, spinning Jenny. Factories were sprouting up like weeds, and workers were being treated about as well as those weeds. Long hours, low pay, and dangerous conditions were the norm, making the working class ripe for a rallying cry. Enter Marx and Engels, with their trenchant critique of capitalism, arguing that the workers should control the means of production. It was a bold idea that appealed to anyone who had ever watched their boss drive off in a fancy carriage while they trudged home on foot. But let's dispel the myth that Marx and Engels were instant rock stars of the revolutionary scene. The manifesto didn't exactly fly off the shelves like a new iPhone. Instead, it slowly seeped into the consciousness of a restless Europe. The revolutions of 1848 may have fizzled out, but the ideas in the manifesto lingered, like a catchy tune stuck in the collective head of the proletariat. You see, the power of the manifesto wasn't just in its critique of capitalism, but in its vision of a classless society. It captured the imagination of those who felt left out by the burgeoning capitalist world, people who were tired of being the extras in a drama starring the bourgeoisie. The pamphlet's clear, forceful language made it accessible, even to those who hadn't spent years marinating in philosophy lectures. It was like the Twitter of its day, short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. And yet, despite this eventual impact, the early years of the manifesto were less glamorous. Picture Marx, still struggling to make ends meet, probably wishing he could pay his bills with revolutionary ideas. Meanwhile, Engels was back at the family business, ironically observing the very capitalist system they were critiquing. Their financial realities were a far cry from the utopian visions they espoused, a reminder that idealism and reality often make for uncomfortable bedfellows. In the grand narrative of history, the Communist Manifesto would go on to become one of the most influential political documents ever written. But in 1848, it was just another pamphlet trying to make waves in a sea of revolutionary fervor. Its slow rise to fame underscores a critical truth. Great ideas often need time to germinate. They don't always explode onto the scene. Sometimes they simmer quietly until the world is ready to catch fire. So, while Marx and Engels were busy crafting their masterpiece, they couldn't have known just how far their words would travel. They were two men with ink-stained hands and lofty ideas, riding in the midst of upheaval. And yet, despite the modest beginnings and initial obscurity, they managed to articulate a vision that would outlast them by centuries. Proof, perhaps, that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas have the humblest of starts. As the echoes of the Communist Manifesto reverberated through Europe, Marx set his sights on a new beast, Das Kapital. If the Communist Manifesto was a fiery pamphlet you could read on your lunch break, Das Kapital was the heavyweight tome that required a forklift and a PhD in perseverance. Published in 1867, this book wasn't just dense. It was a literary black hole, consuming time, energy, and more than a few hapless readers. It was the kind of book that made a dictionary look like a beach read. But let's not judge it by its weight alone. Within those pages, Marx laid out his most profound critiques of capitalism, theories that would ripple through economic thought like a boulder tossed into a stagnant pond. At the heart of Das Kapital was the labor theory of value, a concept as contentious as it was revolutionary. Marx argued that the value of a commodity was determined by the amount of socially necessary labor time required to produce it. In simpler terms, it's the sweat equity that counts. Marx saw capitalism as a system where workers were paid less than the value they created, with the surplus lining the pockets of the capitalist class. If you're imagining dollars sprouting wings and flying into the CEO's yacht fund, you're not far off the mark. This critique resonated with workers who felt like they were always getting the short end of the stick, or more accurately, the short end of the paycheck. Of course, Marx's magnum opus didn't come with a how-to guide for overthrowing capitalism. Instead, it was a meticulous dissection of its inner workings, like a mechanic taking apart a car to reveal the rusted gears beneath the shiny exterior. Marx meticulously analyzed concepts like commodity fetishism, where social relationships were reduced to mere transactions. It was a world where people were defined by what they owned, not who they were, a notion that feels eerily familiar in today's consumer culture. But Das Kapital wasn't an overnight sensation. It was more like a fine wine that needed to age in the cellars of academic thought before it reached its full potency. In its first year, it sold around 1,000 copies, a modest number for a book that would eventually become a cornerstone of economic theory. Yet, those who did read it found a treasure trove of insights about the capitalist system. For Marx, this was the culmination of years of research, writing, and more than a few late nights at the British Museum. Yet, despite the intellectual heft of his work, financial success was as elusive as ever. The irony here is so thick you could spread it on toast. Karl Marx, the man who wrote extensively about capital, had precious little of it himself. His financial struggles were almost Dickensian, a constant juggling act between debts and the generosity of Friedrich Engels. Engels, bless his industrial carton sacks, was the financial lifeline Marx desperately needed. While Engels managed his family's textile business in Manchester, he funneled funds to Marx, enabling him to continue his research and writing. Picture Marx, pen in hand, drafting critiques of capitalism while relying on the very system he lambasted for survival. It's a contradiction so deliciously ironic, even Alanis Morissette would have to take notes. Marx's personal finances were a mess, a fact he was painfully aware of. He once wrote to Engels, lamenting his inability to pay for a doctor for his sick daughter. This wasn't just a man in debt. It was a man trapped by the very economic forces he sought to dismantle. Yet, Marx soldiered on, driven by an unyielding belief in his ideas. His life was a testament to the power of conviction over comfort, a reminder that sometimes the most radical thinkers are forced to live in the margins of the society they critique. Despite his financial woes, Marx's work was gaining traction in intellectual circles. By the late 19th century, Das Kapital was being translated into multiple languages, spreading his ideas to a global audience. In fact, Marxism was becoming something of a brand, a philosophical franchise with its own fan club. Marx was the reluctant rock star of economic thought, his theories debated in universities and workers' clubs alike. It was a peculiar kind of fame, the kind that came with admiration and animosity in equal measure. Yet, for all its density, Das Kapital was a book that spoke to the exploited and the disenfranchised. It offered a new way of understanding the world, a lens through which the downtrodden could see the mechanisms of their oppression. Marx's labor theory of value was more than just an academic exercise. It was a call to arms for those tired of being cogs in the capitalist machine. It was a reminder that behind every product, every service, and every dollar of profit, there were people working tirelessly, often for far less than they deserved. And so, while Marx himself wrestled with economic hardship, his ideas were taking root in fertile soil. Workers across the world were beginning to question the status quo, inspired by the man who had dared to imagine a world beyond capitalism. Marx may have been short on cash, but he was rich in vision, a vision that would continue to inspire, provoke, and challenge for generations to come. In the end, Karl Marx's story is one of contradiction and complexity, a tale of a man who, despite his personal struggles, changed the way we understand economic systems. His life was an illustration of the power of ideas to transcend personal limitations, a testament to the enduring impact of a single mind determined to change the world. Yet, as we ponder Marx's legacy, let's not forget the very human story of a man who, despite his intellectual prowess, was just as vulnerable to the caprices of fate as anyone else. And who knows, maybe somewhere in the great beyond, Marx and Engels are having a good laugh over a pint, toasting a world still wrestling with their revolutionary ideas. Marx and Engels clinking glasses above might be a fanciful image, but back in the grime and reality of 19th century Europe, Karl Marx was grappling with far less jovial matters. As the twilight of his life approached, Marx was beset by a litany of health issues that would make a hypochondriac shiver. Chronic bronchitis, pleurisy, liver problems, you name it, he had it. These ailments weren't just the natural wear and tear of a life lived vigorously. They were compounded by the relentless pace he maintained in pursuit of his intellectual endeavors. Picture this, a man who, despite being physically frail, wielded his pen with the fervor of a 1,000-strong army, churning out manuscripts and engaging in correspondence that spanned continents and ideologies. Marx's tireless work ethic was less a choice and more a compulsion, driven by an unyielding belief in his mission. Even as his body betrayed him, his mind remained a fortress of revolutionary thought. He delved into the formation of the First International in 1864, a testament to his enduring influence. Known formally as the International Working Men's Association, this organization was a melting pot of socialist, communist, and anarchist ideas, a veritable cauldron of political fervor. With Marx as its intellectual godfather, the First International sought to unite workers across borders, an ambitious feat in an era when telegrams were the pinnacle of speedy communication. Now, let's dispel the myth that Marx was some kind of Che Guevara with a bushy beard and a penchant for guerrilla warfare. The romanticized image of Marx as a fiery revolutionary ready to storm the barricades is, frankly, a bit of a stretch. His real weapon of choice was debate, not dynamite. Marx's battlefield was the intellectual arena, where he dissected economic structures with the precision of a surgeon. Sure, he wasn't averse to revolutionary change, but he preferred it sparked by ideas rather than incendiary devices. It was in the meetings and pamphlets of the First International that Marx's preference for intellectual confrontation over physical skirmishes became apparent. While his ideas spread like wildfire, Marx's personal life was more akin to a slow-burning candle. His family life was a mix of affection and chaos, with Marx playing a role that could be charitably described as eccentric. Take his daughters. For instance, Jenny, Laura, and Alina were bright, witty, and fiercely independent, qualities they no doubt inherited from their father. They often found themselves navigating the tumultuous waters of Marx's radical circle, where political discourse was as common as morning coffee. Their sharp intellects and quick wits were their best defenses against the ideological storms that swirled around their household. Yet, for all his intellectual prowess, Marx's attempts at fatherhood were less than stellar. It's not that he didn't care. Rather, his mind was so consumed by his work that domestic responsibilities often fell by the wayside. Imagine Marx trying to balance the demands of his sprawling theoretical constructs with the equally complex task of raising children. It's like asking a chess grandmaster to play a game of checkers while blindfolded. Not exactly his forte. Still, his daughters adored him, often quoting his sayings with affection, even if they occasionally rolled their eyes at his absent-mindedness. The Marx household was no stranger to hardship, either. Financial insecurity was a persistent specter, with Engels once again stepping in as the benevolent financier. Despite these struggles, the family remained a tight-knit unit, their bonds forged in the crucible of adversity and shared ideals. They were a living testament to the notion that while Marx's theories were global in scope, his heart was firmly anchored to those he loved. As the 19th century drew to a close, Marx's health continued to decline, but his ideas were gaining momentum. Translations of his works proliferated, and when he passed away in 1883, at the age of 64, his funeral was attended by a modest gathering of family and friends. Engels delivered the eulogy, famously declaring, "His name will endure through the ages, and so also will his work." It was a fitting tribute to a man whose intellectual legacy would indeed outlive him, spreading across continents and generations like dandelion seeds on the wind. Marx's later years were a paradox of personal frailty and ideological strength, a time when his physical limitations were eclipsed by the transcendence of his ideas. The First International, although short-lived, set the stage for future labor movements, a testament to Marx's enduring influence. And while his family life may have been chaotic, it was also filled with love and loyalty. a microcosm of the very human side of a man often mythologized as an indomitable revolutionary force. As we ponder Marx's later years, we're reminded that even the greatest thinkers are shaped by their personal experiences and relationships. Marx may not have been the perfect father or the fiery revolutionary of legend, but he was undeniably a thinker of unparalleled depth and conviction. His life was a tapestry of contradictions, illness and vigor, chaos and order, intellect and emotion. And through it all, he remained a man driven by an unwavering belief in the power of ideas to change the world, a belief that continues to resonate in the annals of history. As the sun finally set on the life of Karl Marx, his ideas were just coming into their own, like a vintage wine finally uncorked after years in a dusty cellar. Now, let's dive into the Marxist legacy, an intellectual buffet that's been picked over, rehashed, and occasionally tossed like a salad in a storm. It's a tale of adaptation, misinterpretation, and a hefty dose of irony for a man who envisioned a classless utopia, yet inspired a kaleidoscope of political movements, some of which couldn't be more at odds if they tried. First, the good, the bad, and the downright contradictory. Marx's ideas were the seeds that sprouted into a variety of political landscapes. Take the Russian Revolution of 1917, where Marxist theory was the ideological backbone for Lenin and the Bolsheviks. They took Marx's critique of capitalism and ran with it, straight into the arms of authoritarianism. Lenin adapted Marx's ideas to fit the unique Russian context, where the proletariat was a nascent force rather than the industrial powerhouse Marx envisioned. This was less a direct translation and more a creative rewrite, like turning war and peace into a Hollywood blockbuster. Same basic plot, wildly different execution. Fast forward to the Cold War, where Marx's theories became a battleground between East and West. The Soviet Union and Maoist China claimed to be the heirs of Marxist ideology. But let's be real. Calling those systems Marxist is like calling a deep-fried Twinkie health food. They were state-controlled economies wrapped in bureaucratic red tape, a far cry from the egalitarian utopia Marx had imagined. It's a bit of a head-scratcher how Marx's vision of a classless society was co-opted by systems that were anything but classless. If Marx were around, he'd probably raise an eyebrow and ask if anyone actually read his work before launching a political regime in his name. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Marx's ideas also found an unlikely home in various academic circles. American universities became hotbeds of Marxist thought, with professors dissecting Das Kapital like it was the Rosetta Stone of economic theory. Here, Marx was less a revolutionary icon and more a theoretical framework to critique capitalist structures. It was an intellectual exercise, like solving a Rubik's Cube of societal inequalities, complex, colorful, and occasionally frustrating when it just wouldn't line up. But let's not forget the labor movements, both in Europe and beyond, that drew directly from Marx's playbook. The rise of labor unions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was a testament to Marx's enduring influence. Workers banded together, fueled by the belief that they were more than just cogs in a capitalist machine. Marx's call for the proletariat to unite resonated in factories and workshops, where workers demanded fair wages and better conditions. These movements were perhaps the closest realization of Marx's vision, a collective push towards a more equitable society, even if it didn't involve overthrowing the system entirely. Then there's the irony, thick as a London fog, that Marxist-inspired movements often ended up creating new hierarchies. The very man who critiqued capitalism for its class divisions inadvertently laid the groundwork for regimes where power was as concentrated as ever, just in different hands. It's like planning a potluck and ending up with a table full of the same dish. Not exactly the smorgasbord of equality you'd hoped for. And let's have a chuckle at the statues. Oh, the statues. Erected to honor Marx, these monuments have seen their fair share of ups and downs, literally. Some have been toppled, others lovingly maintained, and a few stand as silent witnesses to the irony of their own existence. In some parts of the world, Marx is venerated as a prophet of social justice. In others, he's a ghostly reminder of failed experiments in state control. If Marx could see this, he might scratch his head and wonder if he was being punked by history. So, What would Karl Marx make of all this posthumous fanfare? Would he be flattered by the statues in his likeness, or bemused by how his ideas have been twisted and turned like a pretzel in a philosophy class? Perhaps he'd appreciate the irony that a man who spent much of his life grappling with financial woes has become a symbol of both hope and caution, adored by some, vilified by others. It's as if history decided to play a grand joke, casting Marx as both hero and villain in a narrative that's still unfolding. In the end, the legacy of Karl Marx is as multifaceted as a diamond, brilliant and dazzling, yet sharp enough to cut deep. His ideas continue to provoke, inspire and challenge, a testament to their enduring power and complexity. Marx's vision of a classless society may remain elusive, but his critique of capitalism and his call for social justice resonate as strongly as ever. As we wrap up this journey through Marx's life and legacy, let's remember him not just as a revolutionary thinker, but as a man who dared to dream of a world transformed, even if the road to that transformation is still under construction. And who knows, maybe somewhere, Marx is having a good laugh, amused by the wondrously tangled web his ideas have woven across history. You crack open your eyes to the unmistakable aroma of wood, mingled with the tang of sea salt. Welcome to 9th century Scandinavia, where your Viking shipbuilder life kicks off before the roosters even think about crowing. Trust me, the day's not waiting for you, and neither is that looming deadline on the dragon ship your village is counting on. No pressure, right? It's no secret that the Vikings were the rock stars of the early medieval world. They weren't just about pillaging and raiding, though yes, there was a fair amount of that. They were also savvy traders and explorers, reaching as far as North America, centuries before Columbus even had a ship to sail on. But here's the kicker. None of that globetrotting happens without someone like you, the shipbuilder. You're not just any craftsman. You're the Elon Musk of the Viking age, churning out the sleek, speedy vessels that were the Teslas of their time. Only, your longships didn't run on electricity, but on human muscle and a fair bit of Norse grit. As you kick off your day, you can't help but think about the socio-economic tapestry that Viking society is. Back then, the shipbuilder wasn't merely a guy with a knack for carpentry and a saw. Nah, you were a big deal, a linchpin in the whole Viking operation. You see, those ships weren't just vehicles. They were status symbols, trade lifelines, and the ultimate expressions of power. Your shipbuilding skills were the backbone of Viking commerce and warfare, intricately linked to the very survival and expansion of your people. The sun's barely up, but your mind is already racing through the materials you'll need. A lot of oak for the hull, because why go for anything less robust? It's not just about finding the right trees. It's about knowing exactly where they grow, how far you'll trek to get them, and how much it'll cost. We're talking about trees that are around 100 years old, just the right age and size for a 20-meter longship that can glide silently through the waters or carry 60 warriors ready for battle. And let's not forget about the linen for sails, iron for nails, and tar for waterproofing. All this while calculating the costs in terms of silver or the equivalent in livestock or grain. Yeah, you're not just a builder. You're a project manager with a knack for logistics. Navigating the social hierarchy, you're positioned somewhere between the craftsmen and the chieftains. Sure, the warriors get the glory, but it's your craftsmanship that ensures they return home to boast about it. And don't forget the merchants. They're relying on you to get their goods across the North Sea without sinking. In more ways than one, you've got a hand in the livelihoods of those around you. Vikings might be romanticized as fierce raiders, but they're also shrewd businessmen, and their prowess at sea made their trade networks flourish. You stretch and pull on your tunic, the rough yet familiar texture grounding you in the tasks ahead. The shipyard is already bustling with activity. Young apprentices are hauling logs, while seasoned craftsmen sharpen their axes. The sound of hammers and saws fills the air, a Viking symphony in its own right. But you, my friend, are the conductor. You direct this orchestra, ensuring each note is hit just right to produce the perfect vessel. Now let's talk about the myths. The image of Vikings as unkempt, wild-eyed barbarians is a bit of a stretch. Sure, they were formidable, but they were also surprisingly meticulous. Their ships were not thrown together with reckless abandon, but constructed with precision and care. Take the keel, for instance. It's the backbone of your ship, made from a single, solid piece of oak, painstakingly shaped to ensure the ship's stability and speed. One wrong cut, and you could end up with a vessel that handles like a drunken ox. Speaking of oxen, let's not forget the economic aspect of all this. Shipbuilding wasn't cheap. The resources required were significant, and the investment reflected the strategic importance of these ships. The average longship could cost anywhere from 16 to 20 cows, a hefty price tag in a society where livestock was the equivalent of a Swiss bank account. But the returns were immense. A single successful raid or trading venture could yield riches that far outweighed the initial investment. As the morning wears on, you glance over at the neighboring village Shipbuilder. There's a bit of rivalry, friendly mostly. After all, whose ships are going to be the fastest, the most seaworthy? It's a badge of honor, your reputation on the line with each plank you lay. But beyond the competition, there's camaraderie. You all know the stakes. A shipbuilder's work is never truly done. There's always another vessel to craft, another journey to prepare for. The day's light grows stronger, illuminating the intricate patterns of the wood grain. You pause to appreciate the artistry. Each ship is a masterpiece, a blend of engineering and aesthetics, designed to strike fear into the hearts of enemies and admiration from allies. It's a lot to take in, but hey, no one said being a Viking shipbuilder was for the faint-hearted. As the sun climbs higher, you gear up for a long day of shaping history, one timber at a time. You're part of a legacy that will echo through the halls of time, long after the ships you've built have sailed their last journey. So grab your tools, steady your hands, and get to work. The sea is calling, and it won't wait. All right, so here you are, basking in the Viking sun, ready to tackle another day in the life of a shipbuilder. You're about to dive into the nitty-gritty of crafting a vessel that not only floats but conquers. First up, let's talk materials. If you thought selecting the perfect oak for your dining room table was tough, try picking out a tree that's going to face the North Atlantic head-on. Vikings weren't just grabbing any old wood they stumbled upon. No, they had a discerning eye for oak, pine, and ash. These weren't just trees, they were the holy trinity of shipbuilding. So why oak, you ask? Well, oak was the Vikings' best friend in the timber world. Dense, strong, and durable, it provided the backbone of their iconic longships. We're talking about trees that were a good century old, wise old giants that had seen a fair share of winters, making them perfect for the hull. And let's not underestimate pine. Used for the mast, it was lighter and more flexible, ensuring the sail could catch the wind without snapping like a twig. Ash, on the other hand, was your go-to for oars. Its resilience made it ideal for those long, arduous journeys when muscle power was the only propulsion system available. Now, here's a fun fact. These woods were so valuable, they were basically the Bitcoin of the Viking Age. A prime oak tree could be worth as much as a small farm, and the rights to harvest such trees were tightly controlled. It was a wood economy, and every plank was a precious commodity. If you think modern real estate is priced out of control, imagine negotiating for a tree that could make or break your maritime ambitions. But let's get to the juicy part, the engineering. Viking shipbuilders were nothing short of geniuses. While the rest of the medieval world was still figuring out how to float a bathtub, these Norse innovators were pioneering clinker-built ships. This technique, characterized by overlapping planks, was a game-changer. It allowed for a flexible hull, which meant the ship could handle the roughest seas without breaking apart. Each plank was riveted to the next with iron nails, a process that required skill, precision, and a steady hand. These weren't your average Home Depot nails either. They were wrought from iron, which had to be smelted and shaped by blacksmiths in a labor-intensive process that added to the cost and complexity of shipbuilding. Now, let's chat economics. Building a Viking ship wasn't just a matter of labor and love. It was an exercise in resource management and economic strategy that would make any MBA proud. Vikings didn't have a Wall Street, but they sure knew about investments. The cost of materials, labor, and time was significant. Each ship was a high-stakes venture that required careful planning and allocation of resources. It wasn't just about the ships themselves, but the economic ripple effect they created. The construction process employed a whole community, from blacksmiths to weavers making sails, stimulating the local economy in ways that modern stimulus packages could only dream of. And labor. Let's just say, if you were a Viking shipbuilder, you were the Steve Jobs of your day, innovative, demanding, and perhaps a bit of a perfectionist. You didn't work alone, but you led a team, each member a vital cog in the machine. Apprentices learned the trade from the ground up, absorbing skills that were passed down through generations. This wasn't just a job, it was a legacy. And while today's project managers might have Gantt charts and spreadsheets, you had intuition, experience, and perhaps a bit of Viking luck. Speaking of legacy, let's debunk a myth. The romanticized image of Viking ships slicing through the misty fjords at sunrise is captivating, but the reality was a bit grittier. These ships were not the luxurious yachts of the medieval elite. They were utilitarian, built for speed and efficiency, not comfort. There were no cabins or plush seats, just open decks, exposed to the elements. Rain or shine, warriors and traders alike would huddle under woolen cloaks, braving the icy spray. But here's the kicker. Despite these harsh conditions, the craftsmanship and design of these ships were so ahead of their time that they inspired awe and fear across Europe. The mere sight of a dragon-headed longship on the horizon was enough to send coastal villages into a panic. These vessels were the Pharaohs of the seas, capable of traversing shallow rivers and open oceans alike, which was no small feat for the time. As the day wears on, you and your team continue the meticulous work of shaping and assembling the ship. You're not just building a boat, you're constructing a symbol of power and prestige. Each hammer blow, each fitted plank, brings you closer to completing a vessel that could change the course of your village's future. And as you stand back to admire the skeleton of the ship taking shape before you, it's hard not to feel a sense of pride. You're part of a grand tradition, a line of craftsmen whose work will echo through history. The sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the shipyard. You pause to catch your breath, the smell of wood and salt air filling your lungs. It's been a long day, but the work is far from over. There are still sails to stitch, rudders to carve, and 100 little details to perfect. But for now, you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction. You've built more than a ship. You've crafted a vessel of dreams, ready to set sail into the annals of adventure and legend. And as you pack up your tools, you can't help but think about the journeys that lie ahead, both for the ship and for you. The sea awaits, and with it, the promise of new horizons. As you pack up your tools and let your eyes wander to the horizon, you can't help but think about those far-off lands that your masterfully crafted ship might one day reach. See, the sea isn't just a vast, wet expanse to the Vikings. It's a highway, an express route to riches and adventure. Forget about the love affair with the land. The real romance is with the ocean and its promise of the unknown. Sure, that longship you're working on is a work of art, but it's also a ticket to the bustling trade routes that crisscross the known world. Let's talk geopolitics, Viking style. The world of the 9th century was as politically charged as a modern-day election season. The Vikings were like savvy chess players, navigating a board filled with kings, emperors, and other power-hungry pieces. They weren't just raiders swooping in to grab whatever they could. They were also cunning merchants who knew how to play the long game. With trade routes stretching from the icy reaches of Scandinavia to the sun-baked bazaars of Baghdad, they were the original globetrotters, and they didn't even need a frequent flyer program to rack up those miles. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of these trade routes. Picture the Baltic Sea as the Vikings' personal freeway, teeming with ships carrying everything from amber to furs. But hold on, because it wasn't all smooth sailing. Navigating these waters was no stroll on the beach. Think pirates, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of running into a less-than-friendly neighbor. These voyages were perilous undertakings, not leisurely cruises, and each was fraught with its own unique set of risks and rewards. Let's not forget the Dnieper and Volga rivers, either. These waterways were the Viking equivalents of Route 66, winding their way through Eastern Europe and into the heart of the Byzantine Empire. Talk about a multicultural expedition. One day you're trading with Slavic tribes, the next you're haggling in the markets of Constantinople. And while we're at it, let's give a shout-out to those intrepid merchants who, in a world before GPS, navigated these routes using nothing but the stars and a healthy dose of Viking intuition. But here's the kicker. These trade expeditions were less about the thrill of the journey and more about the bottom line. Forget the romantic notion of fearless Viking warriors. These guys were shrewd businessmen. The Wolf of Wall Street meets the North Sea. They understood that the real treasure wasn't just in the silver hoards or exotic goods. It was in the relationships they forged and the economic power they wielded. And speaking of economics, let's break down the cost of these expeditions. It wasn't just the shipbuilder's fee you had to worry about. There were provisions to stock, crew to pay, and bribes to smooth over any trouble with local rulers. The shipping business was high risk, high reward, and the stakes were measured in silver, not sentiment. A single voyage could make or break a man, and while the potential for wealth was enormous, so was the financial risk. It was a gamble, plain and simple, and not everyone came out a winner. Now, let's address the myth of the fearless Viking warrior. Sure, they wielded axes and wore helmets, sans horns, by the way. Those are pure myth, but the reality was far more nuanced. These so-called warriors were often businessmen in armor, as concerned with their ledgers as with their longships. They knew that sometimes the pen was mightier than the sword, especially when it came to negotiating trade deals that could secure their family's future. But don't get me wrong, the warrior ethos was still alive and well. It just took on a different form. Instead of charging into battle with wild abandon, these Viking merchants approached their expeditions with strategic cunning, weighing the risks and rewards like seasoned investors. They were calculating, pragmatic, and above all, opportunistic, a combination that made them formidable players on the medieval world stage. Let's not sugarcoat it, though. Life on these voyages was brutal. It wasn't all trading silks and sipping mead. The human toll was significant, with crew members facing harsh conditions, disease, and the ever-present threat of conflict. These voyages could last months, sometimes even years, and not everyone who set sail returned home. For every tale of riches won, there were countless stories of lives lost to the sea's relentless embrace. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting the shipyard in twilight, you reflect on the legacy of these Viking voyages. They weren't just about conquering new lands or amassing wealth. They were about building connections and expanding horizons. The Vikings left an indelible mark on the world, not just through their fearsome reputation, but through their contributions to trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. In the end, the Viking era was less about the sword and more about the sail. It was about harnessing the power of the ocean to forge a path through history, one trade route at a time. And you, as a humble shipbuilder, were at the very heart of it all, crafting the vessels that made these epic journeys possible. As you close up for the night, the sound of the sea still echoing in your ears, you know that the story is far from over. There are more ships to build, more voyages to embark upon, and more myths to unravel. The sea is calling, and with it, the promise of new adventures. And speaking of adventures, let's not forget that launching a Viking ship was no simple affair. It was more like a grand spectacle, a blend of theater and theology. You see, the Vikings were deeply spiritual folks, and they believed that embarking on a journey without proper rituals was asking for trouble, like setting sail without a keel, which is a nautical no-no. Before a ship could touch water, it had to be blessed. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of breaking a champagne bottle on the hull, but with a lot more Norse flair. First up, you'd have a ceremony to dedicate the ship to the gods, particularly Njord, the sea god, who was basically the Poseidon of the north. You needed his favor if you wanted to avoid a watery demise. A priest, or Garthai, would lead the proceedings, invoking the divine with offerings and sacrifices. Yes, sacrifices. Animals were typically the unfortunate stars of these ceremonies, with their blood anointed on the ship's prow to ensure safe passage. It was a bit gory, sure, but in a world as unpredictable as the North Sea, you didn't take chances. These rituals weren't just for show. They served a social function, binding the community together in a shared experience. Everyone had a stake in the ship's success, from the chieftain who financed it to the lowliest crew member who rowed it. By participating in the launch rituals, villagers reinforced their bonds and affirmed their place in the social order. It was the Viking version of a corporate team-building retreat, minus the trust falls and awkward icebreakers. Now, you might be wondering if this was all a bit much. Sacrifice, blessings, the whole 9 yards. But think about it. In an era where the sea was as mysterious as it was treacherous, a little divine insurance was just good business sense. The ocean was a living entity, capricious and powerful, and you had to keep it on your good side. Much like dealing with a cranky boss, really. Let's not forget the role of mythology in all this. Viking mythology was rich and complex, full of gods, giants, and epic tales that would make Tolkien blush. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were a lens through which Vikings viewed the world. They explained natural phenomena, justified social norms, and inspired courage in the face of adversity. When you're staring down the barrel of a North Sea gale, It helps to think of Thor battling Jörmungandr, the world's serpent. Myths also functioned as a tool for social cohesion. They provided a common narrative that united disparate communities under shared beliefs and values. Ever tried to get a room full of people to agree on anything? It's no small feat, trust me. But a shared mythology could do just that, offering a framework for understanding life's mysteries and challenges. Speaking of challenges, let's tackle the myth of the noble Viking. Sure, they had a code of honor, but let's not get too misty-eyed. They were human, after all, with all the flaws and foibles that come with the package. Romanticizing them as paragons of virtue does them a disservice. They were strategic, pragmatic, and sometimes ruthless, driven by the same desires and ambitions that drive us today. Take the concept of Valhalla, the warrior's paradise. It's easy to get swept up in the heroic imagery, but the reality was more complex. Valhalla wasn't just a reward, it was a motivator. In a society where life was often brutal and short, the promise of eternal feasting and fighting was a powerful incentive to go out swinging. It was the ultimate carrot for a warrior culture, inspiring bravery and loyalty. And then there's the unpredictability of Viking life. Forget about the idyllic fjords and picturesque meadows. Life was as harsh as a winter in Jotunheim. Famine, disease, and warfare were constant threats, making survival a daily battle. The Vikings didn't just contend with external enemies. Nature itself was a formidable adversary. In such a world, resilience wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. So where does that leave us? Well, with a more nuanced understanding of the Vikings and their world. They were incredible seafarers and traders, yes, but also storytellers and strategists. Their ships were more than just vessels. They were symbols of power, community, and faith. And as a shipbuilder, you were at the heart of it all, crafting the means by which your people could explore, trade, and conquer. As the shadows lengthen and the first stars appear, you prepare to leave the shipyard. Tomorrow, the work continues, the rituals unfold, and the stories evolve. Each ship, a new chapter in the Viking saga, waiting to be written on the open sea. And you're the author, penning history with every plank and sail. So rest well, for the journey is far from over, and the sea, with all its mysteries and challenges, awaits. As you leave the shipyard, the wooden hulls casting long shadows in the twilight, it's time to pause and reflect on the legacy you and your fellow shipbuilders have left behind. It's not just about the wood and iron. It's about the ripples these creations have sent through history. Viking shipbuilders were the unsung heroes of their time, the unseen architects of Scandinavian dominance. And let's be honest, without them, the Vikings wouldn't have been much more than a footnote in European history. They'd have been the guys who were pretty good with axes, but never quite figured out how to cross a fjord without getting their feet wet. The innovations in shipbuilding have influenced maritime technology for centuries. The Vikings' clinker-built ships, with their overlapping planks, were pivotal. This wasn't just a clever design. It was a revelation that changed the game. It allowed for lighter, faster, and more maneuverable ships. Fast forward a few centuries, and you're looking at the skeleton of modern naval architecture. The same principles that allowed a Viking longship to glide effortlessly through the water inspired the sleek lines of today's racing yachts and naval vessels. So, next time you're watching a yacht race, you might want to give a nod to those Norse shipbuilders who figured it out without a single engineering degree between them. But why do the Vikings and their ships continue to capture our imagination? Well, it's a mix of fact and fiction, romance and reality. The Viking Age wasn't just about conquest and trade. It was about exploration and pushing boundaries. They were the original adventurers, the guys who looked at a horizon and thought, I wonder what's over there. Forget about the sanitized, horned-helmeted cartoon version. The real Vikings were gritty, resourceful, and a bit terrifying, which is precisely why they're so fascinating. Now, let's tackle some myths. Yes, they were warriors, but not every Viking was out there wielding a sword and pillaging villages. It's like assuming every Italian is in the mafia because you watched The Godfather. Most Vikings were farmers, traders, and yes, shipbuilders. The raiding was just a part-time gig, albeit one with excellent benefits if you survived. So when you picture a Viking, imagine the guy who not only knew how to swing an axe, but could also negotiate a trade deal in the bustling markets of Constantinople. As for the legendary longships, they weren't just tools of war. They were multi-purpose marvels, equally at home carrying warriors to battle or merchants to distant markets. They were the Swiss army knives of the medieval world, versatile and indispensable. And let's not forget the artisanship involved. These were handcrafted masterpieces, each one unique. Today, we drool over custom-built yachts or vintage cars, but back then, a Viking ship was the ultimate status symbol. It was a declaration of power and prestige, a floating palace that doubled as a war machine. Our fascination with Vikings also taps into something deeper. They embody a spirit of exploration and conquest that resonates with our own desires for adventure. In a world where much of the unknown has been mapped and catalogued, the Vikings remind us of a time when the world was wide open, and every journey held new possibilities. They were the original disruptors, challenging the status quo and reshaping the world in their image. Their legacy is not just in the lands they discovered or the battles they fought, but in the idea that with a sturdy ship and a bit of courage, you could change the course of history. And speaking of history, let's talk about the ongoing archaeological discoveries that continue to reshape our understanding of Viking life. Every year, new finds emerge from the soil and sea, offering tantalizing glimpses into a world long past. These aren't just dusty relics. They're pieces of a puzzle that historians are still piecing together. From ship burials unearthed in Norway to the remnants of Viking settlements in North America, each discovery adds a new layer to our understanding and challenges old assumptions. Take the Garkstad and Oseberg ships, for instance. Unearthed from burial mounds in Norway, these ships were time capsules, revealing not just the craftsmanship of their builders, but the society they served. The Oseberg ship, in particular, was a revelation, its intricately carved decorations telling stories of a sophisticated and culturally rich people. And let's not forget the recent find in Jelestad, where ground-penetrating radar uncovered another ship burial, promising to shed even more light on the complexities of Viking life. These discoveries are more than just academic exercises. They have real-world implications. They force us to reconsider long-held beliefs and remind us that history is not static, but a living, breathing narrative. As we unearth more about the Vikings, we begin to see them not just as fearsome raiders, but as complex, multifaceted individuals who left an indelible mark on the world. As you settle in for the night, perhaps with visions of longships dancing in your head, consider this. What will future historians say about us? In 1,000 years, what artifacts will they unearth to tell our story? Will they marvel at our technology, laugh at our fashion choices, or puzzle over our fascination with cat videos? It's an intriguing thought, and a reminder that we're all part of the same continuum, each contributing our own chapter to the grand saga of humanity. So, as you drift off, let your mind wander to the open sea, where the Vikings once sailed, driven by curiosity and ambition. Their story is one of courage and innovation, of fearless exploration and relentless pursuit. It's a story that continues to inspire and captivate, reminding us that the spirit of adventure is timeless, and that, like the Vikings, we too have the power to shape the future. And who knows, maybe one day someone will look back on our time and find inspiration in the tales we leave behind. Until then, sleep well, dream of distant horizons, and remember, the sea is vast, and the journey is just beginning.